Did you finish the cake? Answer me." Gavin's voice shook through the phone, trembling like someone desperate. I was about to tell him I hadn't eaten a single piece of the walnut cake he sent when he suddenly screamed, Don't eat it. Who did you give it to?" I froze. I had brought the box of cake to Gavin's house the night before and told Rebecca to share it with the kids. I heard my son's breath hitch, then the sound of something crashing on his end of the line. I didn't understand. But that reaction wasn't from someone worried his mother hadn't received a gift. It was the reaction of a man who had just lost control of his own plan. And in that moment, I knew whatever was in that box wasn't meant to celebrate my birthday. It was meant to end it. If you're still listening, tell me where you're watching from. Every comment you leave is another mark in this journey. And if this story has touched you, don't forget to hit like, so it can reach even further. I stayed silent for a few seconds, not because I didn't know what to say, but because my heart felt crushed tight, refusing to beat in its normal rhythm. On the other end, I heard Gavin gasping, footsteps pacing frantically, then a sharp scrape like a chair being yanked across the floor. "Gavin, what's happening, son?" I tried to steady my voice. "Answer me," he screamed again. "Who did you give it to? Did you eat any? Did anyone in your house eat it?" I sat down on the wooden chair by the kitchen window, looking out at my small garden covered in golden Oregon fall leaves. Everything looked peaceful, just like every other morning, except my son's voice didn't belong to that world. I took it to your house last night. Rebecca said the kids like nutcakes, so I thought... I didn't finish before Gavin let out a choked sound, like someone had just pressed a knife to his throat. "Oh, God, no, no." I heard more crashing, then curses, words I had never heard from his mouth when he was a little boy dragging his blanket to my room because he was afraid of the dark. "Gavin, talk to me. What's going on with the cake?" My voice was shaking now. He didn't answer immediately. All I heard were breaths, heavy, erratic, like someone losing his mind. Finally, Gavin forced out a sentence that chilled me to the bone. "Mom, do you know what you just did?" I stared at the empty cake box on my kitchen counter, the cream-colored box with a red ribbon tucked inside a paper bag printed with the logo of a fancy bakery in Seattle. Honestly, I had been surprised when I saw it. Gavin was never the type to buy anything luxurious for me. He had barely remembered my birthday in the 3 years since he married Rebecca. I hadn't expected anything this year either. I planned to buy myself a slice of apple pie, light a small candle, and spend the evening reading. But when I opened the door and saw that gift box sitting neatly on my porch, I smiled, a smile that now feels painfully naive. I even stood there for a moment in the warm afternoon light thinking, maybe my son still remembers me. Maybe things aren't as bad as I thought. I used to believe that. Even when Gavin slowly drifted away after marrying Rebecca, each phone call shorter, each hug colder. I still believed that somewhere inside him was the little boy I carried in my arms when he was 2 years old, the boy I adopted after the accident that took his birth parents. I poured all my love, money, and strength into raising him. But now, with Gavin's voice shaking like he was about to lose his mind, I understood something. The man shouting into the phone wasn't that boy anymore. I pressed again. "Tell me clearly, what's wrong with the cake?" Gavin was silent for a moment, then spoke hoarsely, each word squeezed from his throat. "Don't let anyone eat more. Don't let anyone eat anymore. Do you hear me?" My arms stiffened. Why eat more? Does that mean someone already ate? A cry burst through the phone, making my hair stand on end. It was Rebecca. I heard her scream, "Marjorie, Liam just threw up again. Emma's stomach hurts. I'm calling 911. My blood stopped flowing. The kids, my 2 grandchildren I loved more than life itself, had eaten the cake Gavin thought I would eat. I jumped up, dropping the mug in my hand. Rebecca, how are they? Oh, God, I didn't know. Rebecca didn't answer me. I only heard footsteps, a door opening, and the sound of her picking up one of the kids. Then the distant voice of a 911 operator echoed through the phone. I stood in my kitchen, legs giving out beneath me. My phone slid from my hand onto the table, but I didn't pick it up. It took a long moment before Gavin spoke again, each word sharp as a blade. Get them to the hospital now, and don't go anywhere. You ruined everything. That last sentence shattered me. I ruined everything? Me? I didn't answer. Gavin hung up before I could ask anything else. I sank into the chair, my hands trembling uncontrollably, fingers gripping the edge of the table. I didn't dare think the thought forming in my mind, but my heart, whether I wanted it or not, whispered something terrifying. Gavin wasn't afraid for me. He was afraid because his plan had gone wrong. It took nearly 2 minutes before I had enough breath to call an Uber to Gavin's house. I was shaking so badly I could barely buckle the seatbelt. I remember only saying to the driver, "Please, please hurry." A 15-minute drive turned into a trip straight into hell. I watched the world blur past. Rows of red maple trees, the cafe where I read the morning paper, Mr. Jim's convenience store where he sold candy to the kids. Everything felt foreign and terrifying. When the car stopped in front of Gavin's house, I heard ambulance sirens. Rebecca was carrying Emma. A paramedic carried Liam. The kids were pale, lips dry, eyes unfocused. I rushed toward them. "Rebecca, I'm sorry." "Oh, God, I didn't know," I said, my voice almost collapsing. Rebecca didn't look at me. She said, quickly, "They think it might be food poisoning, but something's wrong. The cake smelled metallic. I don't understand why Gavin keeps... She glanced around. "Where is he?" I shook my head. As the ambulance disappeared into the night, I stood alone in front of my son's house, a place I had visited hundreds of times, with Christmas gifts, home-baked cookies, toys for the kids. But tonight, only cold wind and terror filled that yard. Why had Gavin reacted like that? Why scream knowing I shared the cake? Why disappear when the kids got sick? I knew why. I didn't want to believe it, but I knew. My son had sent me a trap, and the ones who fell into it were my innocent grandchildren. In the second Uber chasing the ambulance to the hospital, I realized my 71-year-old life had just split into a before and an after. I didn't know then that what awaited me wasn't just the truth about that cake, but the truth about the son I raised for 40 years, and that this night was only the beginning of a storm that would tear my family apart. I arrived at the hospital so fast I don't remember walking through the ER doors. Only when my hand gripped the counter, chest heaving from running, did I realize I was inside. Rebecca stood there. Her eyes were red and swollen, mascara streaking down her face. When she saw me, she shook her head weakly and led me toward the pediatric emergency room. The door opened, and I saw Liam and Emma lying on hospital beds, tiny bodies under crisp white blankets, their skin an alarming shade of gray. The scene hit me like a winter wind through a broken window. I stepped closer. Liam, Emma, oh God. My voice trembled so hard each word felt separate from the next. Rebecca wiped her tears. "The doctors are testing. They said it might be poisoning. I don't know." Her voice broke. I looked at the IV lines, the monitoring stickers on their little chests, and the terror in Rebecca's eyes. Even though she and I had never been close, I saw in her face the raw pain of a mother watching her children suffer. I turned to find Gavin. He was standing in the corner, pressed against the wall. His shoulders shook slightly, his hand gripping a water bottle so tightly his knuckles were white. His eyes avoided everything: Rebecca, me, even his own reflection. "Gavin," I whispered. He jolted like someone shaken awake from a nightmare. The water bottle slipped from his hand again, rolling across the floor with a hollow clatter. He bent to pick it up, but his hands were shaking uncontrollably. I walked closer. "Calm down. What happened?" Gavin didn't answer. He just backed farther into the wall as if trying to disappear inside it. Then the doctor walked in with a paper in his hand. "We have the preliminary results," he said, voice steady but tense. "The children show signs of exposure to an inorganic toxin. We're running further tests, but it strongly resembles arsenic." The entire room seemed to lose all air. Arsenic. I'd heard that word only in crime shows, not in a hospital room where my grandchildren lay motionless. Rebecca covered her mouth. Gavin looked like someone had punched the breath out of him. He lost his balance and braced himself against the wall. I saw it. The moment the water bottle slipped from his hand a second time. "Arsenic?" Rebecca asked, voice cracking. The doctor nodded. "We need to know everything they ate within the last 6 hours." Rebecca turned to me, her eyes wide and hollow. "Mom, where did that cake come from?" Her gaze pierced me. I swallowed hard. "Gavin sent it to me. It was for my birthday. I only brought it over because I thought the kids would like it." Rebecca froze. Her face shifted from fear to shock to a painful understanding. "Gavin, you," she whispered, but he cut her off. "Don't you dare say that," he snapped, his voice sharp like metal clashing. Rebecca stepped toward him, her eyes burning. "Don't say that? You freaked out the second Mom said she brought the cake. You disappeared for half an hour. You're hiding something, Gavin." He grabbed her shoulders, desperate, trembling. I said, "Stop talking." I had never seen my son like this. Not angry, not anxious, but terrified. A terror rising from somewhere deep inside him, a terror of someone who knew he had done something unforgivable. The doctor stepped out to continue treating the kids. Rebecca backed away toward their beds. Gavin turned his face away, hiding whatever expression he didn't want us to see. I stood in the center of that small room, under the harsh white fluorescent light and the sharp smell of antiseptic. Everything blurred and spun. And as I looked at my 3 family members, Gavin avoiding my eyes, Rebecca trembling, the children lying limp in their beds, I felt the scattered pieces in my memory start to fall into place. The family dinners Gavin said I didn't need to attend, the calls he ignored, the comments Rebecca made that stung like needles. "You should keep some distance so we can build our own family. You're always getting in the way. Our life doesn't need extra complication." It wasn't just distance. It was a pushing away, with intention. And now, in this cold hospital room, I finally saw it. There was something deeper, darker, more rotten inside my family than I ever imagined. Rebecca turned to me, and her eyes were different. No contempt, no coldness, only fear, guilt, and pain. She stepped forward, voice shaking. "Mom, I'm sorry. I didn't know. I swear I didn't know." I placed my hand on her shoulder. "I know. Now isn't the time for blame. Just focus on the kids." Gavin spun around, eyes dark. "Don't talk like you had nothing to do with this. If you hadn't brought the cake—" "Gavin Wells," I said slowly, my voice so calm it startled even me. "I brought it because I trusted you, because I thought you sent something good for me. And now you dare blame me?" Gavin went silent, and that silence was louder than any confession he could have made. I looked at my son for a long time. That face used to be my pride. Those eyes once lit up every time he showed me one of his childhood drawings. Those hands once held mine when he cried because he was afraid to sleep alone. Now, none of that was there anymore. Standing in front of me was a man whose eyes kept avoiding mine, whose hands were shaking, and whose breath carried a dark secret leaking out with every exhale. When the doctor returned to say Liam was showing signs of improvement but still needed toxin monitoring, Rebecca broke down sobbing. I pulled her into my arms the way I would hold my own daughter. Gavin watched us, his face twisted, stretched tight like a string about to snap. I could see a flicker of regret on him. But regret for what? For the kids being poisoned? Or because his plan failed? I couldn't tell the difference yet. But my instinct, the same instinct that carried me through 8 decades of life, told me this. Some cracks only show when the light is strong enough. And today, that light had finally begun to break through the surface of my family. When the nurse walked in and asked us to leave so they could continue more tests, I held Rebecca's hand and squeezed gently. "I'll stay here. I'm not going anywhere." Rebecca nodded. As for Gavin, he turned away, slipped out, and disappeared down the hallway like a shadow who knew his time was running out. I stood outside the hospital room, leaning against the white wall, watching my son's back grow smaller in the distance. I wanted to call him back. I wanted to believe that some part of the child I raised still existed inside that man. But the longer I watched, the colder I felt. Not the cold of the hospital, but the cold your soul feels when it finally understands. My family was rotting from the inside, and I had closed my eyes to it for far too many years. That night, after the kids were moved to the observation unit, after Rebecca curled up in the waiting room chair, and after Gavin vanished somewhere in the city, I knew this was only the beginning of a very long and very painful truth. I sat in the pediatric waiting area, my fingers interlocked so tightly my knuckles turned white. Rebecca leaned her head against the wall, her eyes swollen. Every few minutes she got up and paced a short distance like someone trapped between fear and grief, with nowhere to put either of them. The ER doors opened. The doctor stepped out, his face tense, though his voice stayed professionally calm. "We have more accurate results," he said. "The children were exposed to arsenic, low dose, but still dangerous. We'll continue monitoring and detox treatment." Arsenic. This time, the word wasn't some vague term from a crime novel. It was something flowing in the oiforme veins of my grandchildren. 2 children who should be thinking about weekend homework, soccer games, and art class, not a toxin that could take their lives. Rebecca clutched her chest as if someone had squeezed her heart. I walked to her and placed my hand on her shoulder. "Rebecca, they're getting good care. They're doing everything they can." For the first time in years, she didn't pull away when I touched her. She didn't stiffen, didn't give me a polite, forced smile. She just looked at me, her eyes filled with something she had never allowed me to see before. Trust, even if only a small flicker, like the last bit of light at the end of a long tunnel. Gavin appeared a few minutes later. He moved fast, almost running, breathing hard, his coat thrown on crookedly, hair messy. He didn't look like a worried father. He looked like a man running from something, like someone who just heard the police were closing in. "What did the doctor say?" Gavin asked, but he didn't look at Rebecca or me. "Arsenic," Rebecca said, her voice hoarse. The kids were poisoned with arsenic. Gavin blinked rapidly, then glanced around as if looking for an exit. "I have to go," he said urgently. "I have something I need to handle. I can't stay." Rebecca grabbed his sleeve. "What could be more important than your children lying in the emergency room? Gavin, what is wrong with you?" He yanked his arm back, hard enough that Rebecca nearly stumbled. "I said you don't understand. I have to go." I stepped forward. "Gavin, sit down. I need to talk to you." "No, not now." "Yes, now," I said, my voice firm, "because I have a feeling you know exactly what's happening." Gavin finally looked at me, really looked at me, for the first time since all this began, and in his eyes, I didn't see worry. I didn't see pain. I saw fear. A kind of fear not directed at the children, but at himself. I stared straight into my son's eyes. "Gavin, tell me, what was in that cake?" "I don't know," he yelled. Too fast, too defensive. I did not look away. "Gavin Wells, I'm asking one last time, what was in that cake?" A second of silence fell, a second that felt like a lifetime. Then Gavin exploded. "It was supposed to be you," he screamed, his voice cracking but sharp like metal scraping steel. "Not the kids." It felt like the floor vanished beneath me. The air around us froze instantly. Rebecca slapped her hand over her mouth and collapsed to her knees. I stood there, my hand trembling, my breath breaking, my mind echoing those 7 words over and over. It was supposed to be you. That one sentence crushed 40 years of motherhood, crushed every dinner I skipped so I could buy him school clothes, crushed every night I stayed awake when he had a fever so bad he convulsed, crushed every word I ever said, every ounce of pride, every drop of unconditional love I poured into him. I looked at my son, but I no longer recognized the person standing there. Rebecca turned to me, tears streaming. "Mom, does that mean She didn't finish her sentence, but she didn't have to. We both knew. Gavin slammed his hand against the wall, his face flushed. "You always share everything, always giving things away. I send you a gift, and you give it to someone else. You've done that all your life." I don't know whether Rebecca's sobbing or the sound of my own heartbreaking was louder. "What are you talking about, Gavin?" I breathed. "I share because I thought everything was meant for the family." "No," he shouted. "You share because you don't know how to keep anything for yourself. You give everything to the whole world and expect everyone to thank you. I don't want your kindness. I want you to know your place." Rebecca screamed through her tears. "Your place? She's your mother." Gavin turned on her and pointed directly at her face. "What do you know? My mother always interferes, always shows up, always has an opinion. Without her, we'd have fewer problems." Rebecca stepped back, as if he had slapped her. I thought your mother was the problem. But you did this to her?" Gavin looked away. "I don't have time for this. I have to go." "Go where?" I asked, softly, barely recognizing my own voice. Gavin didn't answer. Then he took a step like he was about to run again. "Gavin!" I called, using the last breath of someone who had just been stabbed in the heart. "Look at me." For the first time, he looked at me for real, and in his eyes, I knew. I knew more clearly than any confession he could have made. Rebecca sobbed. "He was going to kill you. Oh God, he was going to kill you." Gavin looked at Rebecca, then at me, his face twisted, full of desperation but no remorse. Then he turned and ran like something was chasing him, ran like if he didn't run, he'd be swallowed whole. His footsteps echoed down the tile hallway of the hospital until they faded behind a corner. I stared after my son's disappearing shadow. My legs gave out. I collapsed onto the chair like someone swept up by a storm. "I can't believe it," I whispered, holding my head. "My son. How could he?" Rebecca sat beside me, tears falling openly. No pretending, no coldness, no distance anymore. "Mom, Marjorie, I'm sorry. I was wrong to think you were a burden, wrong to think you were interfering. I didn't know he had lost all humanity." I placed my trembling hand over hers. I don't blame you." Rebecca cried like a child, raw, broken, stripped of every wall she ever put up. We sat there together, two women who had once kept their distance, once misunderstood each other, beside the beds where Liam and Emma were fighting the poison in their blood. In that moment, I realized my family had been rotting for a long time. Tonight, the paint finally peeled off, exposing the truth underneath. And that truth wasn't just that my son wanted to kill me. The truth was also that I, by trusting too much, yielding too much, loving too much, had let things spiral this far. Rebecca gripped my hand tighter. "Mom, I promise I'll be here for you. I won't let you be alone." That promise was the only light in the darkest night of my life. I left the hospital when the sky had already grown dark. The parking lot lights flickered on one by one, casting soft yellow patches across the pavement, still damp from the afternoon drizzle. Rebecca stayed with the kids. I needed a few minutes alone, not to rest, but to face what I knew I had to do next. I sat in my car, hands on the steering wheel, but not starting the engine yet. The rearview mirror reflected my eyes, red, swollen, but strangely bright. I had cried enough. I had hurt enough. And now something was rising inside me. Something I had never allowed myself to feel in 40 years of motherhood. The will to survive and defend myself. I knew where Gavin would go. He always went there whenever his life fell apart. After losing jobs, after fights with his wife, after debts he couldn't pay. My sister Paula's house. Paula had always treated Gavin like her own child. Even when he was wrong, falling apart, selfish or cruel, Paula always had one sentence to defend him. "He's just under pressure." Ever since our parents died, Paula had always been soft toward Gavin, and Gavin knew exactly how to exploit that weakness. I started the car. The hospital faded behind me, while the faces of my two grandchildren cut into my mind like a fresh wound. The drive to Paula's house was about 15 minutes. I passed quiet streets, shops that had closed early, the dim glow of street lamps. Everything looked peaceful, so unlike the chaos inside me. When I arrived, Gavin's car was parked right at the entrance, the old gray one with patches of peeling paint. I stopped the car, let the engine run a few more seconds, then turned it off. No rushing, no trembling, no fear. I walked up the steps and heard Paula's voice inside, the shaky tone of someone trying to reassure, maybe herself. I knocked. Paula opened the door after only a few seconds. Her eyes were red and swollen, clashing awkwardly with the forced smile she attempted when she saw me. "Marjorie, what are you doing here at this hour?" Her voice quivered. "Gavin is here," I said plainly. "I need to see him." Paula hesitated, blocking the doorway as if trying to keep me out. "Gavin, he just needs some time. He's panicking under pressure. You know, everything—" "I know," I cut in. "That's exactly why I need to see him." Without waiting for her reaction, I pushed the door gently and stepped inside. Paula didn't have the strength to stop me. Gavin stood in the middle of the living room, hands in his pockets, shoulders slumped, eyes hollow. But when he saw me, he didn't show fear, regret, or even hurt. He straightened, his back stiff, eyes cold like a stranger. "Oh, you're here." No emotion, no remorse, not one word asking about Rebecca or the kids. My chest tightened, but my voice stayed frighteningly calm. "Gavin," I said, "why?" He let out a short snort, looking away as if my question annoyed him. "You've lived too long," he said. "I need the inheritance." I froze as if turned to stone. Paula's eyes widened. Her hand flew to her mouth. "What did you say?" I asked again, though I knew I heard him clearly. He took a step closer, no longer hiding anything. "I saw your savings. $300,000. I'm drowning in debt. The loan sharks are closing in. I need money. And you're healthy, living your long life with no intention of slowing down. What do you need it for?" I heard Paula gasp in horror. I remained still. My hands were ice cold, but my heartbeat slowed strangely. Gavin kept going, as if he were talking about refinancing a mortgage, not murdering his own mother. "You're almost 70. You're not useful anymore. I have a family to take care of, a future. You're just taking up space." I looked straight at the face of the boy I had raised since he was 2, the same face that once buried itself in my chest during nightmares, hugged me whenever he got an A, called Mom in a shaky voice after falling off his bike, and suddenly I realized, in all those memories, I was the one holding him. He had never once held me. Paula stammered, "Gavin, what are you saying? You can't—" "Be quiet," he snapped. "I'm talking to my mother." I raised a hand to signal Paula not to speak. "Gavin," I asked, my voice even to the point I barely recognized myself, "you plan to use arsenic." He shrugged. "It's the easiest way. No trace, no suspicion. A heart attack at your age, everyone would buy it." Paula screamed, "Gavin, you're insane. Do you know the kids ate it too?" "You always share everything," he said, frowning. "It was supposed to be you. I didn't tell you to give it to anyone else. You made it complicated." Paula covered her face. As for me, my whole body felt weightless, an emptiness so deep it was frightening. But strangely, beneath the ruins, something cold and sharp flickered awake, a sliver of clarity. I didn't scream, didn't accuse, didn't beg, didn't ask why he saw his own mother as an obstacle. I only asked the one question I needed to hear to erase any last shred of hope. "You never loved me, did you?" Gavin looked at me as if I had asked the most ridiculous question in the world. "Love? You raised me, sure, but I didn't ask you to. You chose that. You don't owe anyone love, so why would I? You did what you wanted, and now I need you to give some back, that's all." Paula broke down crying. I just stood there, looking at my son, silent, a silence that hollowed out the air. Finally, I turned to Paula. "You don't need to say anything," I said softly. "You didn't cause this." Paula trembled as she came closer and held my arm. "Marjorie, I'm sorry. I didn't know. I thought, it's all right," I said. "Now you know." I looked at Gavin one last time. He stood there, out of patience, out of excuses, only the bare cruelty left. A man who once called me mother, but never saw me as anything more than a wallet. I opened the door. Cold air rushed into the living room. Standing in the doorway, I spoke in the calmest voice I had ever used, strengthened by an entire lifetime behind it. "Gavin, you chose your path, and I will choose mine." I stepped out onto the porch. The door closed behind me with a soft click, but that sound echoed inside me like a bell tolling. As I walked down the steps, I knew this more clearly than anything in my life. My revenge, not with knives, not with poison, but with truth and justice, begins tonight. If you're still listening to this story and feel the ache of a mother betrayed by her own child, please tell me where you're watching from in the comments, or leave a few words so I know we're walking through this together. I drove away from Paula's house in complete silence. Portland at night looked softer, streetlights reflecting on the damp pavement, stretching the shadow of my car into a long, dark ribbon. But inside me, nothing felt soft. No more trembling, no more crying, no more holding on. The night sky pressed against the windows, and my heart pressed against a truth I had avoided my whole life. I had to change. Not for Gavin, not for Rebecca, not for the kids, for myself. A woman who had spent more than half her life in quiet sacrifice, believing love alone was enough. But tonight I saw the true nature of the son I'd raised since he was 2. A truth I could no longer turn away from, no longer forgive, no longer soothe with tears or prayer. I parked by the park near my home, turned off the engine and leaned back in the seat. Outside, Portland was calm, as if nothing terrifying had happened. But I felt like someone who had just escaped a fire, my chest still smoldering. I inhaled deeply, and in that moment I knew more clearly than ever. I would not let him destroy even one more minute of my life. The next morning, I walked into attorney Martin Cole's office. Martin was an old friend of my late husband, a man who had worked in the field for 40 years, known for never losing a complicated family case. His hair was evenly gray at the sides, his face seasoned, but his eyes sharp as steel, like someone who had witnessed too many tragedies to believe in innocence. When I told him everything, from the cake, the hospital, to Gavin's confession, he sat still for a long moment, hands clasped together. "Marjorie," he said quietly, "I'm sorry you had to go through this, but you came to the right person. If you want to protect yourself and the children, we'll have to fight." "I want to," I said plainly. "Are you ready to become a different woman?" he asked, looking straight at me. I nodded. Not ready. Already beginning. Martin immediately handed me a list of tasks for the next 72 hours. Close all old accounts. Open new ones at a different bank with strict security. Change every safe lock. Update the will. Gather evidence. Prepare to charge Gavin with 3 counts: financial abuse, intentional harm, and attempted murder. Every line cut the past cleanly like a blade. For the first time in decades, I didn't feel scared signing the papers. I felt relief. 2 days later, I left the old suburban house, a place full of sweet memories, but also the place where I had quietly endured far too much. I moved into a luxury penthouse in downtown Portland, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking a shimmering city at night, a white kitchen, a large bedroom with thick curtains, a living room facing the Willamette River. For the first time in my life, I lived somewhere not because my husband wanted, my son needed, or it's close to the kids' school, but because I wanted it. I placed my hand on the glass railing as the city wind brushed my hair. I was no longer the woman waiting for Gavin's calls, no longer the mother who forgave the 100th time. It was just me now, and strangely, I was enough. On the 3rd day, I met Sylvie, the therapist Martin recommended. Sylvie was around 50, French-American, with silver-streaked hair and a warm, low voice like a gentle stream. She looked at me not with judgment or pity, but as if she could see right through the armor I had worn for 40 years. "Marjorie," Sylvie said, "you don't have to be strong here. Here, you get to exist." I broke down at her first sentence, crying like someone had turned on a tap inside my chest. I told her I had imprisoned myself in the role of the perfect mother, the devoted wife, the quiet woman. I had never dared to say enough, never set boundaries, never believed I deserved protection. Sylvie listened, then said, "You've been mistaken. Marjorie, your worth isn't measured by how much you give, but by how much you allow yourself to keep. And now it's time you learn that again." When the first session ended, something inside me opened. I walked out no longer the timid woman afraid of conflict or of being disliked. For the first time, I asked myself, why did I ever need permission to be myself? A week later, I changed my appearance. Not to be pretty, not to look younger, but to see the woman I was becoming. I cut my outdated long hair, dyed it a sophisticated light brown. I tossed out the worn cardigans and replaced them with tailored, elegant suits. I wore heels I once believed I didn't deserve. I looked in the mirror, and in that moment, I saw life. Not a life to endure, a life to fight for. Martin helped me organize financial documents, and when I opened old boxes from my late husband, old booklets, labeled envelopes, I found something he left that I never knew about. 3 hidden accounts, 2 long-renewed certificates of deposit, and a long-term stock investment. Total, nearly $550,000. I froze at the number. I had lived frugally, when I didn't need to at all. And the scarier part, Gavin only knew about 1/5 of it. He thought I only had around $300,000, the amount he saw last year when I went to the hospital for tests. He saw that number and thought, my mother is weak, old, alone, the perfect target. He didn't know I was a senior accountant for 25 years, fluent in financial reporting laws, familiar with every bank security loophole. Martin looked at the papers I brought and smirked slightly. "Marjorie, you're smarter than I expected. Gavin has no idea who he's messing with." I answered without pride, only truth. He forgot who his mother is. I'll remind him. That night, in my new penthouse, I sat at the kitchen island with a small notebook. I wrote out each step of my revenge clearly. No shaking hands, no hesitation. Protect assets. Erase every path Gavin could touch. Prepare airtight legal documents. Gather proof of his debts and shady dealings. Record every call. Expose the truth at the exact moment he least expected. I stared at the handwriting. The writing was still mine, but the person writing was someone entirely different, someone I had always feared becoming, someone I should have been years ago. I set the pen down, looking out at the city lights reflected on the glass. Tiny sparks glowed in my eyes like embers waiting to ignite. I whispered, "Gavin, you made your choice. Now it's my turn." I began the new part of my life with deliberate silence. I didn't tell anyone what I was doing or planning. I lived in the penthouse, watching Portland shine every night, like a sleepless city, teaching myself not to unravel when old memories surfaced. But that peace was temporary, because to strike back, I needed the truth. And for the truth, I needed someone who could see through every lie. Martin understood that better than anyone. A few days after I moved, he called me, his voice steady as always. "Marjorie, I have someone I want you to meet, the best I've ever worked with." The next day, I arrived at Martin's office while the sun was still hanging in the sky. The glass windows on the 15th floor reflected a clear springtime Portland. But what we were about to discuss was as dark as the bottom of the Willamette River. "This is Detective Howard," Martin introduced. A man stepped in. He had to be in his 60s. Tall, rugged in the truest sense of the word, sun-darkened skin, deep wrinkles carved around his eyes like traces of 100 nights spent tailing criminals. Close-cropped gray hair, eyes sharp as a blade. But what reassured me was the way he looked directly at me. Not with pity, not with judgment, only with the respect owed to a woman climbing out of a pit. "I know your case," he said in a gravelly but steady voice, "and I'll find everything you need. No sugarcoating, no glossing over." I nodded. "I need the truth, no matter how ugly it is." Howard held my gaze for a few seconds, then said, "You'll have it." Just 3 days later, Howard returned with a stack of files so thick it startled me. I sat across from him in Martin's conference room. Overhead, lighting reflected off the dark wooden table, casting a dim glow, like the kind you'd see in an interrogation room. Howard placed the file in front of me. Documents, photos, notes, neatly gathered in a brown folder. "Ms. Marjorie," he began, his voice dropping lower, "I hope you're ready." I wasn't sure if I was, but I nodded anyway. Howard opened the file and flipped the first page. "Gavin owes nearly $70,000 in gambling debt." I leaned back in my chair. That number wasn't just big. It was a pit. Howard continued, as if he knew pausing would only make the shock hit me harder. "And that's just the surface. He borrowed from 3 other sources, a West Coast loan shark outfit and 2 enforcers in the Pearl District. These are photos of him meeting them." He pushed the stack toward me. Gavin stood in a dark parking lot next to a black SUV. 3 tattooed men surrounded him, one handing him an envelope. Gavin's face was tense, his hands shaking. I flipped through more photos. One of him in a dim red-lit bar, talking to a man wearing a thick gold chain. Another of him walking out of a pawn shop. Another of him leaving the house with a large bag. Howard said those were Rebecca's belongings he sold. Every picture felt like a knife. Not because I didn't suspect debt, but because I never imagined his desperation had dragged him into places this dark. "Why?" I whispered. "Why did he let it get this far?" Howard sighed. "Gambling addicts lose their stopping point. When they lose, they borrow to recover. When no one will lend, they sell. When there's nothing left to sell, they take risks. And when the risks fail, they turn to crime." I knew exactly what he was talking about. My chest trembled, but I didn't allow tears to fall. Martin added, "Marjorie, Gavin trying to harm you wasn't a spur-of-the-moment decision. His debt and the pressure from dangerous people pushed him." Howard nodded. "Those loan sharks aren't gentle. He has only a few weeks before they deal with him. If he can't pay, they'll come knocking." I closed the file. My hands trembled. "That's why he wanted the inheritance." "Exactly," Howard said. "And he knew you were the only one with enough money to save him." Martin looked at me carefully. "If you don't act, those people will go after Gavin. And when they can't find him, they'll go after anyone connected to him." I lifted my head. "You mean they could come for Rebecca, for the kids?" "It's possible," Martin said, "which is why we need to move fast, quietly, and securely." That evening, I went to the hospital to see Rebecca. The children's room felt warmer now, less of the harsh antiseptic smell, soft golden light falling over the small sleeping faces of the 2 kids. Rebecca sat beside Liam's bed, her eyes exhausted but softening into a faint smile when she saw me. "You're here," she whispered. I sat next to her, and I told her everything. No sugarcoating, no softening, no gentle phrasing to spare her feelings. I told her about the gambling debt, the $70,000, the things he sold, the emptied savings accounts for Liam and Emma, the men in parking lots, the West Coast loan shark crew, the truth that Gavin was no longer hovering on the edge of wrongdoing. He had crossed completely over. Rebecca listened in shock, not interrupting once. When I handed her a copy of the kids' savings account with a balance of $0, she didn't cry immediately. She just stared at the page for a long time, as if each number was draining the breath from her lungs. Finally, she set the paper down, covered her face, and broke down, loud, aching sobs, stripped of pride. I didn't know he'd gone this far. I was so stupid, so blind. I wrapped my arms around her, gentle, forgiving, without blame. "Rebecca, this is not your fault," I said. "You loved your husband. You trusted him. Anyone would have, I understand." Rebecca lifted her tear-streaked face. "But he tried to hurt you, and he hurt the kids. I can't believe it." I cupped her cheek and wiped away a tear. "It's all right now, Rebecca. We're on the same side. For the kids, and for this new life we're building." Rebecca grabbed my hand and held on tight, as though letting go would make her collapse. "Mom Marjorie," she whispered, her voice shaky but clearer than ever. "I'll stand with you, from now on, for Liam, for Emma, and for myself, too." I gave her a tired but genuine smile. "Thank you, Rebecca." In that moment, for the first time, we were no longer mother-in-law and daughter-in-law. We were two women betrayed by the same man, and more importantly, two mothers trying to save their children from the sins of their father. A month passed after the night I walked out of Paula's house, the night I finally saw that Gavin was no longer the child I once knew. That month felt like a year, long, but for the first time, I felt I was truly living. I spent those weeks preparing everything, financial, legal, emotional, personal. I met Sylvie weekly, learning to escape the cycle of self-blame and to see myself without the lens of roles and obligations. I met Martin often, going over documents, revising every detail, planning every next step. Rebecca and I began speaking more. Not polite, strained small talk, but real conversations between two women who had suffered and were trying to rise again. The kids improved with treatment. In the afternoons, I visited the hospital. Rebecca sat beside Emma's bed, and Liam texted me, asking if I'd bring sugar-free pudding. I sat with them, read stories, or simply rested my hand on their legs so they knew I was there. No one mentioned Gavin. No one dared hope he would change. And then, one day, Martin said, "It's time for you to be seen." I looked at him, waiting. If Gavin thinks you're scared or hiding, he'll get careless. We need him to understand you're in control. Showing up at the right moment will shake him. I understood instantly. A wounded animal attacks, but an animal being watched, cornered under a spotlight, panics. "The fundraising gala this week," Martin continued. "He'll be there. I checked the guest list, and I think you should go." I inhaled deeply. I knew the gala he meant, an annual Portland arts event. Long evening gowns, crisp suits, expensive wine, a grand piano, speeches, and polite smiles. I used to attend with my husband years ago. Gavin also showed up sometimes, whenever he needed to polish his image for grants on projects that never materialized. That evening, I opened the wardrobe in my new apartment. The old clothes were gone. I had donated most of them. I picked the black suit I bought last week. Sharp tailoring, clean lines, high collar, fabric soft as silk but structured with strength. I tied my freshly styled hair into a low bun, letting a few strands frame my temples. When I looked in the mirror, I saw a woman who had never before been allowed into the light, strong, calm, defined, no longer begging anyone to accept her. I smiled faintly. "There you are," I said to the reflection. The gala entrance was even grander than I remembered. Golden light poured over marble floors, abstract paintings lined the walls, tables were arranged with elegant displays of food. A string ensemble played slow classical music, each note deliberate. My heels clicked softly on the floor as I entered. No one recognized me, and that was exactly what I wanted. People glanced at me with polite curiosity, perhaps wondering if I was a CEO or the head of some foundation. I let them wonder. For the first time in my life, I wasn't Gavin Wells's mother, the Wells widow, or the frail Mrs. Marjorie who stayed in the background. I was simply myself. I took a sip of red wine, felt the familiar dry finish on my tongue, but tonight, the taste carried a different meaning. I walked slowly around the room, taking in the music and the chatter. No one knew I was looking for someone until I saw him. Gavin stood near the reception table, wearing a freshly pressed coat that couldn't hide how gaunt he had become. His face was tight, eyes sunken, jaw marked by tiny stress sores, signs of sleepless nights. He was trying to talk to an elderly donor with white hair, but the man shook his head, and I watched Gavin swallow hard. I moved toward him, slow, steady. My steps felt light, but to me, each one was a pair of scissors cutting through 40 years of pain. When I got within a few feet, Gavin turned. His eyes widened as if he'd seen a ghost, not because he recognized me, but because he didn't. I stood before him, black suit, new hair, calm face, eyes bright like sparks, sharpened by suffering. He opened his mouth. "Mom?" His voice was so small I almost missed it. I lifted the corner of my lips, not a smile, but absolute control. "Hello, son." Gavin stepped back. I saw both his hands tremble. For a month he believed I'd be afraid, shrinking, hiding, crying, begging. But the woman standing before him was not the one he once dismissed. He stammered, "Mom, you look much better than the day you tried to send me to my grave?" I asked softly, almost whispering. The white-haired donor stared between us in shock and quietly stepped aside. People nearby began to notice, not because I was loud, but because the silence had thickened like fog. Gavin swallowed hard, lips paling. "Mom, what do you want here?" I stepped closer. "I just came to say hello, because tonight I'm not hiding anymore." His eyes darted nervously, like a cornered animal searching for an escape route. I leaned in slightly and repeated the exact line he threw at me that day in the hospital, the line I would never forget. Time to collect. His face drained of color as if someone had pulled the blood straight out of it. Not because I spoke loudly, but because I said it softly. So softly that every word seemed to slide into his ear, leaving him nowhere to run. I turned and walked away, leaving him standing there, trembling under the warm golden lights of the elegant hall. I could almost feel his spine curve, his knees weaken. His fear was so thick it felt tangible in the air. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. I knew he was afraid, truly afraid. Not afraid of humiliation, but afraid of being exposed. That night, when I returned to the penthouse, Portland was glowing once more, lights rippling across the surface of the Willamette River like soft ribbons. I stepped onto the balcony, the breeze lifting my hair, and I felt like a different person. Not because of the glamorous gala, not because I made Gavin falter, but because I had taken the single most important step in the journey of a mother pushed to the edge. I was no longer a victim. Around 11 p.m., I opened my laptop on the kitchen counter. The blue light reflected across my face, sharpening the features I had only recently learned to love again. I opened the email Martin had prepared for me. Preliminary complaint. List of evidence. Instructions for filing with the district. Attorney's office. I placed my fingers on the keyboard, no shaking, no hesitation. I selected, submit, file initial report. Just one click. A tiny chime sounded, and in that moment, I knew. I had stepped into a battle with no way back. No more softness, no more illusions born from motherly love. I whispered steady and quiet. You made your choice. Now I make mine. When I pressed submit, sending every legal document to the prosecutor's office, a hollow but liberating feeling washed over me. It wasn't the satisfaction of revenge. It was the sensation of laying down new bricks for my life. For the first time built on my terms, not on duty or a warped sense of motherly obligation. The following week unfolded exactly as Martin and I planned. Yet oddly, even though the plan was mine, every step felt cold as steel. Cold, but necessary. Rebecca was the first person I helped. She arrived at the law office that Monday morning. Gone were the tears of the hospital. In their place, exhaustion, yes, but also a fragile resolve. She handed her kids to the temporary sitter, sat across from me, and said, "Mom, I want a divorce, and I want full custody of Liam and Emma." I placed my hand over hers. We'll make it happen, and we'll win. We didn't need many words. We understood this wasn't just ending a marriage. It was saving 2 children from a father who had fallen to the bottom of cruelty. Martin and his team drafted the divorce petition, the request for full custody, and the restraining order. All the evidence Howard gathered, the drained savings accounts, the photos with loan sharks, the debt reports, even pictures of Rebecca's belongings being sold, went into the file. These alone are enough for the court to give Rebecca full custody, Martin said, and to keep Gavin away from the kids. Rebecca nodded, pain in her eyes, but no wavering. I'll do anything for my children. I looked at her and felt a deep ache, not because she was weak, but because she had been too strong for too long in a marriage that should never have demanded this of her. Meanwhile, I officially filed attempted murder charges against Gavin. Intentional, premeditated, backed by physical evidence and his own words. I even included the recording from Paula's house where he admitted, "You've lived too long, I need the inheritance." That confession was a blade he had plunged into himself. Martin said, "We don't need him to sign anything, his words already condemned him." I nodded, my chest heavy. I wasn't doing this to get revenge. I was doing this because if I stayed silent, he would hurt someone else. Rebecca, the kids, or even himself. The next step was the house. Gavin had pawned the family home 3 months ago. Rebecca didn't know. When she found out, she nearly collapsed. That house, it's where the kids grew up. Her voice cracked. I made a hard decision, partly from responsibility, partly because I couldn't let the children live in instability created by Gavin's chaos. I paid Gavin's remaining debt, all $38,000, under one condition. Rebecca had to transfer full ownership of the house to herself, removing Gavin entirely, even his signature. Martin agreed. You're protecting Rebecca and the kids while cutting Gavin off completely. Rebecca cried when I handed her the paperwork. Mom, you didn't have to. I shook my head. I'm not doing it for Gavin. I'm doing it for you and the children. She hugged me. A real hug. Not polite, not reluctant. 3 days later, Gavin returned to the house in the suburbs, the one he once called his, the one he mortgaged behind Rebecca's back, the one he treated like property. He turned the doorknob. Locked. He tried the back door. Also locked. He called Rebecca. She didn't answer. He banged on the door, shouted. For the first time, the neighbors didn't stay silent. They called the police. When officers arrived, Rebecca showed the restraining order. The look on Gavin's face as he was forced to leave, fear, bewilderment, anger crushed under helplessness, was indescribable. He stood on the street watching the house sealed shut, watching his wife refuse to look at him, watching neighbors whisper. In that moment, he realized the world he built on manipulation and entitlement had collapsed, and that was only the beginning. 2 weeks later, the media published the first headline, "Portland Man Suspected of Poisoning Mother to Obtain Inheritance." No mention of me, no address, just his name. And then another article, a local news channel, a few blogs. The story spread faster than I expected. Gavin called me. I didn't answer. He texted, "What are you doing?" I stayed silent. One evening, I stumbled on his live stream. He looked hollowed out, eyes wild, hair matted like someone who hadn't slept in days. He told the camera, "It's not true. I never tried to hurt my mom. They're lying about me." But comments flooded in. "You're lying. Police don't investigate nothing. You sold your wife's stuff and blame everyone else? You're terrified of the loan sharks chasing you." The more he spoke, the more he incriminated himself. He ended the stream abruptly when pounding sounded at his motel door. The loan sharks looking for him. After that, he slept in his car, hid in public bathrooms, or crouched behind convenience stores open 24 hours. He was truly unraveling. He lost his job. The company emailed a notice of termination. Severe damage to the organization's public image. Rebecca forwarded me the email. I read it with a strange calm, not joy, not triumph, just calm, as if everything unfolding was simply the universe correcting itself. But what made me calmest wasn't his downfall, nor his debts, nor the cracks in his facade. It was this. For the first time in my life, I understood the value of rising up. For myself, for Rebecca, for Liam and Emma. For all the years I endured his cold words without daring to fight back. Watching him lose control under the weight of his own actions didn't bring me pleasure. It brought me justice, a justice that finally arrived, late, painful, but inevitable. One evening, standing in my penthouse overlooking Portland's bright skyline, I closed my eyes and whispered, "Son, this isn't me destroying you. This is you destroying yourself. I'm simply not holding you up anymore." I thought I was ready for the moment Gavin would be arrested. But when the notification buzzed on my phone, a message from Martin. "They've arrested Gavin. Charges filed." I froze. I was in the kitchen, a gray Portland morning lingering outside the window, mist clinging to the glass. The warmth of my teacup curled around my fingers, but I felt like I drifted out of my own body. No joy, no shock, no anguish, just a vast, quiet stillness. After 40 years, I finally understood what it meant to let go of someone who once called me Mom, not out of hatred, but because the truth left no other path. 3 days later came the first hearing. Gavin was kept in the Multnomah County Jail, awaiting trial for premeditated attempted murder. On top of that were Rebecca's divorce papers, the restraining order, and the debt records loan sharks submitted to protect themselves. I appeared in court wearing my familiar black suit, hair neatly tied back. Rebecca sat beside me, eyes swollen but steady. The children were at school with a sitter. Martin and his team reviewed documents one last time before the session. "Marjorie," Martin said, "we're prepared. Today is only procedural, but understand, this case will be long. The evidence is heavy, and Gavin will fight." I nodded. "I'm ready." In that moment, I knew the truth ahead would hurt. but it was the pain required to heal the rest of my life. The official trial began 2 weeks later. The Multnomah County Courthouse was always crowded, but that morning felt different, heavy. Reporters gathered outside, barred from entering the courtroom but eager for updates. As I stepped inside, it felt like walking into a room where every memory of my life had been summoned. Rebecca sat beside me, her hand trembling until I held it. We took our seats in the front row. Martin stood by us. Across the room, Gavin was brought in. I will never forget that moment. He had lost at least 30 pounds. The orange jumpsuit hung loosely on him. His wrists bore red marks from the cuffs. His hair was a mess, jaw unshaven, eyes sunken from nights without sleep. But what hurt me most was not his appearance. It was his eyes. The same eyes he had the night I left Paula's house. Fearful, furious, desperate, and most devastatingly, unrepentant. He glanced at me, then quickly looked away, as if my presence burned him. I didn't shake. I didn't cry. I looked at him with absolute calm. The prosecutor opened, voice steady and clear. Mrs. Marjorie Wells is the victim of a deliberate attempted homicide. The defendant, Gavin Wells, prepared arsenic and placed it in a box of walnut cookies specifically intended for his mother, with the goal of causing fatality in order to obtain inheritance funds. The courtroom buzzed with whispers. Gavin dropped his head. The prosecutor continued. We have medical reports confirming arsenic in both children, hospital surveillance of the defendant's panic, investigative photos of the defendant meeting loan sharks, and most importantly, a recording of the defendant verbally admitting his intent. The room fell still. Gavin shot up from his seat. That's a setup. My mother tricked me. She framed me. The judge struck the gavel. Defendant, sit down. But Gavin kept yelling. Rebecca planned everything. She wants to take my kids. All of them want to ruin me. Rebecca winced. I placed a hand on her back, steady and calm. For weeks, the trial became the center of local media attention. Reporters weren't allowed inside, but they waited every day by the doors. Each afternoon as we stepped out, dozens of questions rang out. Mrs. Wells, are you afraid your son will seek revenge? Rebecca, do you believe Gavin can change? Do you think Gavin did it for money or because of pressure? I didn't answer. Rebecca didn't either. We stayed silent, the kind of silence needed when you want the truth to speak for itself. During arguments, Gavin's attorney tried to create another story. Gavin didn't intend to harm anyone. He was under debt pressure, mentally unstable. It was just a moment of impulse. But the prosecutor responded with a sentence that made the courtroom stop breathing. Debt doesn't make someone put arsenic in their own mother's food. The jury stayed quiet. Gavin bowed his head, but when the prosecutor played the recording, he snapped up, eyes wide. She was supposed to eat it, not the kids. You've lived too long. I need the inheritance money. Gavin screamed. I didn't say that. That's not my voice. But everyone in the courtroom knew he said it, and he wasn't sorry. In the end, the jury needed only 2 hours to decide. They returned to the courtroom, faces solemn. The judge asked, Have you reached a verdict? The jury foreman stood up. Your Honor, we find the defendant, Gavin Wells, guilty of premeditated attempted homicide. No one said anything. No one breathed loudly. No one moved. Gavin collapsed into his chair, hands shaking violently. No, Mom, how could you do this to me? The judge announced, 14 years in prison, with no parole for the first 6. The sound of the gavel hit like a blade severing the rest of his life. Rebecca burst into tears, covering her face. I turned and held her, and she fell into my shoulder like a child desperate for shelter. Not because we were happy, not because we won, but because everything was finally over. Or at least, the worst part of it. When the officers walked Gavin past us, he looked at me, not with hatred, but with disbelief. "I'm your blood," he whispered. "Why would you do this to me?" I answered softly like a breath. "I didn't do this to you. You did this to me. I simply stopped protecting you." Gavin was taken away, feet dragging, head down. That image I will never forget for as long as I live. But I didn't shake. I didn't collapse. I didn't feel the old kind of pain. All I felt was emptiness. A distant, peaceful kind of emptiness, like the air after a storm finally passes. Outside the courthouse, Portland was drizzled with light rain. Rebecca wrapped her arms around me. "Mom, because of you, my kids and I are safe." I squeezed her shoulder lightly. "Not because of me. Because you were brave enough to leave first." The children ran to her legs, then to me. Liam stood on tiptoe to wrap his arms around my waist, and Emma rested her head against my hip. I held all three of them close. In that moment, I understood. I had lost Gavin. A part of my heart would always mourn that. But mourning doesn't mean going back. And I also understood. I had saved another family. Rebecca, Liam, Emma. And saved myself from decades of darkness. That evening, I returned to the penthouse. Streetlights spilled across the Willamette River, glowing like gold ribbons on the water. I stood by the glass wall, closed my eyes, and let my breath settle slowly. I didn't feel victory. I didn't feel joy, only relief, the kind only survivors of storms truly understand. I was no longer the woman others could manipulate, no longer the mother trying to patch cracks that couldn't be saved, no longer the faint shadow in someone else's life. I whispered, "At last, I'm free." After the trial, after the final strike of the gavel, I walked out of the courthouse as if stepping out of a dark room I had been trapped in for half a lifetime. The early winter Portland air was cold, but my heart was strangely calm. No more fear of Gavin showing up at my door. No more hearing his footsteps pacing at night. No more enduring harsh words or cold stares that crush my spirit. I was free. A freedom not given by anyone, but reclaimed by me. But that freedom wasn't only for me, it was for women like me. Women who had lived too long inside invisible walls of sacrifice, guilt, and endurance. So I decided to do something I never thought I would be strong enough to do. I created a foundation. It started as a small idea, flickering in my mind for weeks after Gavin's sentencing. One evening, while pouring tea in my kitchen overlooking the city, I remembered my sessions with Sylvie and the stories she told. Older women enduring emotional abuse, exploitation, disrespect, stripped of control over their own lives. It was heartbreaking. I was not an exception, only one of thousands silenced. I picked up my phone and called Martin. "Martin," I said, "I want to start a support foundation for older women facing domestic abuse. I want them to have a place to go, a voice, someone who believes them." Martin went silent for a few seconds, then said, with a warmth I rarely heard from him, "Marjorie, I think that's the best thing you could ever do." We began working. I used part of the $550,000 my late husband left me, the amount I found early in my journey, as seed funding. I chose the name Second Dawn Foundation. The name made my heart tremble for the first time in months. Because this wasn't only my second dawn, it was for the women still waiting for theirs. Rebecca was the first person I told. She stayed quiet for a long time after hearing it. "You want to help women who went through what you did?" "I want to help women who went through what we did," I said, placing my hand over hers. Rebecca burst into tears, but not the painful kind. This time it was gratitude, recognition of her own worth, and the relief of stepping out of the dark. "Mom," she said through tears, "I want to go back to school. I want to study psychology. I want to help women like us." I squeezed her hand. "Do it, Rebecca. I believe in you." And she did. She enrolled in a community psychology program at Portland State University. She studied in the mornings, cared for the kids in the afternoons, and volunteered at the foundation in the evenings. She poured her heart into every call from older women seeking help. For the first time, I saw her shine. Liam and Emma became two tiny suns warming my heart again. Every weekend they came to my apartment. Liam knocked with 3 familiar taps. Emma ran in and hugged my legs as if I were the safest place on earth. "Grandma, do you have pudding?" "Grandma, I brought my new drawing." Among the potted plants on my balcony, with children's laughter filling the air, I learned the meaning of family again. Not a family by blood, not a family by paper, a family that chooses each other. Rebecca often sat beside me on the sofa as we watched the kids play. "You know," she said one afternoon, sunlight washing over her face, "I used to think you were just quiet and gentle. I never realized you were this strong." I looked at her. "Not strong, Rebecca. I just didn't want to be hurt anymore." As the foundation gained official approval, media attention grew. First a small magazine interview, then a local TV segment, then a national show. I never revealed every detail of the case. I kept the most painful parts private, but I shared enough for some 60 or 70-year-old woman sitting alone in a living room to think, if she could do it, maybe I can too. And they came. They wrote letters. They called. They lined up outside halls where I spoke. During seminars, I stood on stage and looked at rows of elderly women, some with silver hair, some in old cardigans, some clutching small handbags like holding their trembling youth. Many cried as they listened. One elderly woman took my hand afterward. "Mrs. Wells, I thought I was the only one whose child treated me badly. Turns out we have each other." I hugged her, my heart softening. In their eyes I saw myself years ago, fragile, enduring until I had nothing left. And silently I thanked God, thanked fate for leading me out of that place. I also relearned how to love myself, not through makeup or expensive clothes, but by caring for my mental health, protecting boundaries, and placing myself first. I learned how to use money to protect me, not to please others. I bought a new balcony chair because I liked it, not because Gavin once called the old one outdated. I ate dinner at the restaurant I liked. I took small trips, alone, for the first time in decades. The comfortable life I live now isn't to show off. It's a reminder that I spent a lifetime enduring. And now I deserve better. No one controls me anymore. No one spends my money. No one uses age, weakness, or harsh words to crush my worth. I look in the mirror each night and smile gently. I'm back, and I'm stronger than ever. One afternoon, while Rebecca was at school and the kids were in class, I sat on the balcony watching the sunset. The last light stretched across the Willamette River like a golden silk ribbon. I closed my eyes and breathed. "I'm grateful," I whispered, "grateful for this second chance." But I knew. My story wasn't finished. Not because there were battles left, not because revenge wasn't complete, but because life doesn't end with a neat period. It opens new doors. And at 70, I was stepping into the widest one yet, a door leading to healing, to freedom, to the woman I was always meant to be. 3 years passed since Gavin's sentencing. It sounds long, but to me it felt like a gentle breath the universe finally returned to me. My life settled. The foundation grew. Rebecca was close to graduating. My grandchildren thrived. And I became the version of myself I never thought I'd meet again. But that peace was stirred by a pale yellow envelope the mail carrier placed carefully in my hand on a rainy Portland afternoon. The top corner showed the prison's return address, sender, Gavin Wells. I stood frozen for a long moment before opening it. Not because I was afraid of him, but because I was afraid I might feel something I no longer wanted to feel. Afraid of pity, afraid of softening, afraid that 40 years of being a mother would try to slip back through the cracks I had worked so hard to close. I tore the envelope slowly, as if each rip of paper was a piece of the past that needed to be opened one last time. Inside, Gavin wrote neatly, a handwriting I had forgotten he once had. He began with an apology. The words sounded sincere, but beneath them I sensed something hazy. "Mom, I know everything was my fault, but you also have to understand my situation." The moment I read the word "but," I exhaled. Just one word, and I could already hear Gavin's voice from 3 years ago. Smooth, cold, always twisting the truth, so he never had to take full responsibility. Then he wrote, "I'm begging you to visit me. Just once. So I know you haven't really abandoned me." Abandoned? I let out a laugh. Not the kind born of amusement, but a long exhale pulling decades of exhaustion out of my chest. Abandoned? Who abandoned whom? He abandoned his children when he ran from loan sharks. He abandoned Rebecca when the truth broke her. He abandoned me, the woman who raised him since he was 2, by trying to kill me with poisoned chocolate cakes. If anyone had been abandoned, I thought it was me. For 40 years. I folded the letter but didn't throw it away. I took it to my therapist, Sylvie, that same afternoon. Sylvie had been with me since the days after the first hearing, when my mind was still tangled between being a mother and being a victim, between duty and damage. She looked at me with calm eyes, neither judging nor rushing. I handed her the letter. Sylvie read it slowly. Then she set it on the table, so gently the paper made no sound. "How did you feel reading it?" she asked. I leaned back in the chair, looking out the window at the Portland rain falling in thin threads. "I felt empty," I said. "Not angry, not pity, just empty." Sylvie nodded. "And what makes you hesitate about visiting him?" I stayed silent for a long time. "Because I'm afraid. If I don't go, I'm a bad mother." My voice was so small it nearly dissolved into the rain. Sylvie tilted her head, studying me. "Marjorie," she said gently but firmly, "I want to ask you something. What makes you want to see someone who once tried to kill you?" The question pierced the softest part of my heart. I met her eyes. Maybe. Because for 40 years, I believe mothers had to forgive, had to stay, had to endure, I whispered. Sylvie nodded slowly. "But you're no longer the woman from those 40 years. You're the woman who rebuilt herself after loss, the woman who saved herself. You don't owe Gavin a single visit." My chest felt lighter, as if someone had finally lifted the invisible weight I'd carried since I was 20. "I think," I told Sylvie, "Gavin wants me to return to the weak mother I once was, the one who overlooked every mistake, the one who lifted him every time he fell, even when he was the one pushing me over the edge. Exactly, Sylvie said. He wants you back inside the mold you shattered, and you have the right to refuse. I drew a long breath. Maybe I already knew the answer before I came here. That evening I sat at my desk. The lamp cast a warm glow, the curtains softened the shadows, and outside, the rain tapped steadily. I opened a blank sheet of paper and picked up my pen. I wrote his name first, Gavin Wells, without shaking, without anger. Then I wrote my final letter to him. Gavin, I received your letter. I hope what you wrote was sincere, and that in these past years you've had time to see the consequences of your actions. But I need to tell you this. I cannot come to the prison to see you, not because I hold resentment, but because I am no longer the lifeline you reach for every time you drown in your own choices. I paused, closing my eyes. Something deep inside me felt undone, like the last knot of a rope that had been tied around my heart for decades. I continued. I've learned that people only truly change when they run out of people to blame. And I refuse to be the person you blame even one more time. I hope you find the remorse you mentioned. I hope you learn to take responsibility like an adult. But my path no longer runs beside yours. I sign this, Marjorie Wells. Not Mom. No longer Mom. I was no longer the title he had trampled so easily. I folded the letter, placed it in an envelope, and sealed it. When I dropped it into the outgoing mailbox, I felt as if I had set down a part of my life that had been heavy for far too long. Strangely, I didn't cry. I didn't tremble. I didn't regret. I just felt light. Lighter than I'd ever felt. The next day, as I walked to the foundation office, Portland was bright in a rare way. Sunlight glinted off rain-soaked branches, and the Willamette shimmered like liquid glass. I stood by the riverbank, hands in my coat pockets, my hair lifting gently in the wind. I'm truly free, I whispered. Not just free of Gavin, not just free of 40 years of darkness, but free of the worn-out, self-sacrificing version of myself, free from the pressure of being the proper mother, free from emotional debts, free from the illusion that enough love could change someone. I was free to live, to love, to build, to heal. I thought of the women who came to the foundation. I thought of the elderly women who hugged me and cried. I thought of Rebecca and my grandchildren. I thought of every life I had touched, and those I would touch in the future, and I smiled. I knew my journey had closed the old chapter, but new doors ahead were wide open. And me? I stepped into that light as someone entirely new. For the first time in 70 years, I was unafraid. Years passed since I mailed my final letter to Gavin. My new life flowed gently, like cool water over stones once rough. Every morning in my sunlit penthouse, I felt grateful that I chose to stand up, to save myself at a moment when it felt too late. But it turned out it's never too late for an older woman to start again. Second Dawn Foundation grew faster than I ever imagined. From a tiny office with 2 desks and a few worn chairs, we now had a full support center where older women could come, talk, receive legal guidance, and, most importantly, be heard without judgment. Hundreds of women came through those doors, some with snow-white hair, walking slowly, some trembling because it was the first time they dared speak aloud secrets they'd buried for decades. Some came just for a hug, a word of comfort, a reminder they weren't invisible. I saw myself in each of them. a woman who once believed sacrifice was duty, endurance was virtue, and family bonds had to be preserved no matter how twisted. Now they stood up, reclaiming their lives. Witnessing that warmed my heart every time. Rebecca, my daughter-in-law, became our lead counselor. She appeared in newspapers, on television, at statewide conferences. When people asked why she chose this path, she always answered, "Because my mother-in-law saved my family with the strength she spent a lifetime searching for." Every time I heard that, my throat tightened. Not from sadness, but from a recognition I had never known. Rebecca had changed so much that it was hard to remember she was once cold toward me. Now she lifted other women the way I once lifted her. Liam and Emma grew stronger than I expected. They became the two small lights brightening my later years. Liam matured into a boy who loved helping others, while Emma proudly told friends I was the hero of the family. I laughed every time. A hero? I was only a grandmother who lived longer than her own pain, but to them, I was proof a family can be reborn after ruin. One year, I received an award honoring contributions to the senior community of Oregon. I wore a cream suit, James's pearl necklace, and stepped onto the stage in long applause. Holding the small trophy, I felt I was holding my entire journey. From the dark kitchen where I was treated like a burden, to the lit stage where I stood as a woman of strength and worth. One autumn night, Portland was chilly. I sat on my balcony with a soft wool scarf around my neck, watching the city light up like scattered stars. The wind carried the scent of rain and dry maple leaves. I closed my eyes, letting time pass over me like a slow-moving film. I remembered the day Gavin stood in the hospital and said that sentence I'll never forget. I remembered the night I pulled my keys from Paula's door, my heart hollow. I remembered signing the complaint against my own son, remembered the trial, Rebecca's tears on my shoulder, remembered the prison letter the moment I signed Marjorie instead of Mom. I had endured everything a lifetime could hold, and I survived. Not just survived. I bloomed from the ashes life left behind. I opened my eyes to the dancing lights below, and I realized something simple, yet it took a lifetime to understand. The one who tried to kill me inadvertently helped me be reborn. If Gavin hadn't pushed me to the edge of death, I might never have been born again, never known my strength, never lived such a beautiful life in my final years. My story didn't end in tragedy. It ended in power, a power I paid dearly for, but never regretted. I knew my story wasn't just mine. Every day I retold it, in halls, on TV, or through handwritten letters to elderly women trying to step out of the dark. I knew someone out there saw themselves in my words. I couldn't save everyone. But if I could save even one person, then every pain I endured had meaning. Night settled. The city grew quiet as if someone had placed a hand over its heart. A deep peace spread through my body like I was being gently held by the life I fought to reclaim. I leaned back and whispered, "At last, I am completely free. Free from fear, free from shame, free from the roles society forced onto mothers, and free to live the final chapter of my life as a woman it took me decades to find again." I smiled, closed my eyes, and let my breath melt into the cool night air. And I knew, from this moment on, the past can no longer bind me. My life had closed every shadow and opened a dawn no one could take away. Thank you for staying with me until the end of my story. If you're still here and this journey touched your heart, I would truly love to know where you're watching from. Please tell me in the comments. Even a small message lets me know we're still walking together. And if you want to hear more stories of strength, family, and rebirth in our later years. Please like, comment, and subscribe. From the bottom of my heart, thank you for sharing your time with me today. The basement door had barely closed when I heard the lock click above my head. I spun around, my heart pounding wildly. "Daniel?" I called my son's name, my voice trembling. There was no answer. Only my daughter-in-law's voice floated down, cold and flat. "Just stay down there, the doctor's on the way." Before I could even understand what was happening, my husband leaned close to my ear and whispered something that sent a chill straight through me. "Don't panic. They don't know what's hidden behind that wall." I followed his gaze, and for the first time after 46 years of marriage, I realized I had never truly known the man standing beside me. If you're still listening, tell me where you're watching from. Every comment you leave is another mark in this journey. And if this story has touched you, don't forget to hit like so it can reach even further. For the first few seconds, I stood frozen in the familiar basement that had suddenly become foreign. The old ceiling bulb swayed slightly, its weak yellow light spilling over stacked cardboard boxes, old Christmas decorations, family photo albums, a few wooden chairs with broken legs that Howard had always refused to let me throw away. I had come down here countless times over more than 30 years of living in this lakeside house, but never had it felt so small and suffocating. "Howard, I don't understand," I whispered, my hand gripping his arm like a survival reflex. "They locked the door." I rushed to the stairs and yanked hard on the doorknob. It didn't budge. I pounded my hands against the wooden door, the sound echoing back hollow and frighteningly weak. "Daniel, what are you doing? Open this door right now." My voice broke apart, no longer holding the calm of a mother used to protecting, used to enduring. From upstairs, I heard footsteps moving away. Then Claire's voice drifted down again, still even, still carrying that fake sweetness I had grown used to hearing over the past 5 years. "Please stay calm. We just want everything to go smoothly. The doctor will be here soon." The doctor. The word rang in my head like an alarm bell. Not because I was afraid of hospitals or white coats, but because I understood all too well that in this world it only takes one doctor's signature for an elderly person's entire life to be sealed shut. I turned to look at Howard. He wasn't running to the door. He wasn't shouting. He wasn't pounding on anything. He was simply standing there, back straight, eyes strangely clear, completely unlike the 72-year-old man my son had just described as starting to decline. "Howard," I swallowed hard, "what are they planning to do to us?" He placed both hands on my shoulders and gave a gentle squeeze, just enough to make me feel that he was here, truly here. "Margaret," he said softly, "do you remember how I once told you that some things are safer the less you know?" I frowned. Decades of marriage flashed through my mind, quiet dinners, short vacations, weekend mornings on the porch watching the lake shimmer. Howard had never been a mysterious man. He was a construction engineer, principled, orderly, someone who hated complications. He wasn't the type to keep secrets. "What do you mean?" I asked, my voice dropping. Instead of answering, he tilted his head, signaling me to be quiet. We stood completely still for a few seconds, listening. Upstairs, I heard Daniel speaking in a low, urgent voice, followed by footsteps pacing back and forth. Maybe they were waiting or calling someone. Howard gently pulled me back, away from the stairs, toward the old brick wall at the far end of the basement. A chill ran through me. I had been looking at that wall for decades, dark bricks, some chipped, others stained with damp patches from the lake's moisture. "Do you remember," Howard whispered, "when you asked me why I never let anyone repair this section of the wall?" My heart started racing. I remembered. I had complained that it looked ugly, that it ruined the house I loved showing off to friends every summer. Howard had just smiled and said, "It's fine the way it is." "You said it was convenient," I stammered. He nodded. "That's right, convenient." A small noise came from upstairs, maybe the front door opening. I heard Claire say faintly, "Yes, we're waiting." I began to understand, not through logic, but through the instinct of a mother, of a woman who had lived long enough to recognize when something was no longer about family. This morning, everything had started to go wrong the moment Daniel walked in with a smile that was far too practiced. My son was not a man who smiled easily. I had raised him for 43 years. I knew him well. Daniel smiled freely only when he was a child, when his father taught him how to fish, when I baked apple pie for Thanksgiving. Since marrying Claire, his smiles had become conditional. "Mom, Dad," Claire had said in a voice light as a feather, "we think it's time to have a serious conversation about your future." Future, a word that sounds beautiful, but for older people it is often used as the opening line for decisions they are not allowed to refuse. That was why, when the basement door locked, I no longer thought this was a misunderstanding. I understood perfectly. This was a plan, and it had been prepared for a long time. I looked back at Howard. Under the dim yellow light, his face looked older than usual, but his eyes did not. They were sharp and alert, like when he was still working, whenever he spotted an error in a blueprint. "Howard," I lowered my voice, almost pleading, "if you know what's going on, you have to tell me." He was silent for a few seconds. I could feel the struggle inside him, between the habit of protecting me with silence and the reality that this time, silence could kill both of us. "I never meant for you to find out this way," he said slowly, "but maybe now is the time." He took another step toward the old brick wall. I followed, my heart pounding so loudly I was afraid it could be heard. His hand lifted, brushing lightly across the bricks, stopping at one darker than the rest. In that exact moment, I understood why he had been so calm when his own son locked us in the basement. And I knew that the life I thought had finally settled at 69 had just officially turned in a completely different direction. Howard was still standing in front of the brick wall, his hand resting lightly on that darker brick, but he didn't do anything yet. He looked at me, his eyes signaling me to wait, and in that moment, the memory of this morning flooded back, so vivid, I could almost smell the coffee steaming in the kitchen again, hear the lake birds outside, and feel that vague unease I had tried to brush aside. The morning had begun far too perfectly. Daniel and Claire arrived earlier than usual. Too early. My son rarely stopped by before 10, always blaming traffic or meetings. Yet today, just after 8, I heard a car pull into the driveway. When I opened the door, Claire stood there with an overly wide smile, almost deliberate, holding a box of pastries from my favorite bakery in town. "Mom, I know you like blueberry," she said, her voice sweet as honey. Daniel stood behind her, hands in his jacket pockets, nodding as he explained, "We just thought, it's been a long time since we had a serious family talk." That single sentence sent a chill down my spine. Serious talks in families rarely bring good news, especially when they come with pastries and forced smiles. We sat around the kitchen table. Morning sunlight streamed through the large window overlooking the lake, reflecting off the calm water. I remember thinking, how strange, on such a beautiful morning to feel so heavy inside. Claire began. She was always good at this. "Lately you've been looking more tired," she said, placing her hand on mine, a gesture I once thought was caring, but now, looking back, felt controlling. "You're always worrying about Dad, about the house, about everything. I think you deserve to rest." I was about to brush it off with a laugh, but before I could speak, Daniel continued, his voice slow and careful, like he was reading from a rehearsed script. "And Dad, he's been forgetting things lately," he said. "Last week, he even forgot a doctor's appointment." Howard looked up from his newspaper. "I didn't forget. I rescheduled." Daniel avoided his father's eyes. Claire immediately cut in. "But the doctor said it already. Little signs like that, we shouldn't ignore them." I set my coffee cup down on the table. The soft clink sounded louder than usual. "Which doctor?" I asked. Claire smiled. "Dr. Cole, the one I introduced last time." I remembered that visit very clearly, a completely routine checkup, where Howard answered every question clearly, even joking that he remembered his doctor's schedule better than his own birthday. Claire leaned closer to me, lowering her voice into something intimate and concerned. "Mom, we're just worried. People say at this stage many older folks don't realize they're getting weaker." I realized I was being placed into an invisible box, one labeled elderly and lacking self-awareness. Then Claire mentioned a name I had never heard before, Silver Haven Residence. "It's a wonderful place," she said, her eyes lighting up. "A high-end senior living facility like a resort. Private rooms, doctors on duty, 24 hours, an indoor pool, a book club. You'd love it." "We already went to see it," Daniel added, unable to hide his enthusiasm this time. "The scenery is beautiful. Security is great. You and Dad wouldn't have to worry about anything." I remember asking, very slowly, very carefully, "How much does it cost?" Claire hesitated for just a breath, then answered as if it were nothing. "About $8,500 a month. For both of you." I did the math quickly in my head. $8,500 a month. More than $100,000 a year. I looked at Daniel, then at Claire. My son worked in sales, his income unstable. Claire worked at a bank, earning a decent salary, but not enough to casually cover a number like that. "And who's paying?" I asked. The air in the kitchen suddenly grew heavy. Claire looked at Daniel. Daniel sighed as if I were the one being difficult. "You have this house," he said, his tone softer but no longer respectful. "It's too big for just the two of you anyway. Selling it would be enough to take care of the future." The lakeside house. The house Howard and I bought with a 30-year mortgage. The house where Daniel grew up, where he learned to swim off the wooden dock in the backyard, where I once sat sewing his high school graduation gown. And now it was being spoken of as a number in a calculation. "So," I said slowly, "you want to sell your parents' house, put us in a nursing home, and then what about the rest?" Claire rushed to answer. "You're misunderstanding. Everything is for you. The remaining money will be managed carefully. You won't have to worry about anything." I looked at Howard. He folded his newspaper and sat up straight. "No," he said. Just one word. Clear, final. "Dad," Daniel began. "I said no," Howard repeated. "We're not selling the house, and we're not going anywhere." I had never seen Claire's expression change so fast. The smile on her lips froze, then vanished, revealing something colder and harder underneath. "Howard," she said, calling him by his name for the first time without Dad. "The doctor has already been clear. You're not in the best condition to make decisions anymore." I felt the blood rush to my face. "What are you talking about?" Claire turned to me, her eyes carrying a carefully polished look of pity. "Mom, you're always protecting Dad, but have you thought that you might be exhausted too?" The words were like a velvet-wrapped knife. They didn't draw blood right away, but they cut deep. Daniel stood up, pulling his chair back with a harsh scrape against the floor. "You should think carefully. We've already prepared the paperwork." "What paperwork?" I asked. Claire opened her purse and pulled out a thick folder. I glanced at it and saw familiar but terrifying words. Property transfer, legal power of attorney, capacity evaluation. Howard stood up. He didn't raise his voice, but it hardened. I'm not signing anything. A heavy silence fell over the kitchen. Then Daniel said the sentence that, even now, standing in this cold basement, I still hear word for word. You're no longer clear-headed enough to make your own decisions. From that moment on, everything was decided. Now, standing in this cold basement, I understood that this morning had never been a family discussion. It was the first trial, and the verdict had already been written. They were just waiting for us to sign. Howard turned to look at me. His eyes were no longer those of the gentle older husband I was used to, but of a man who had been preparing for this for a very long time. You see, he said quietly, this wasn't sudden. I nodded, my throat dry. Above us, I heard footsteps returning, faster this time. Howard took a deep breath. Then he turned fully toward the old brick wall, and I knew that what I had once believed was my peaceful past had just been violently torn open. Howard had just turned fully toward the brick wall when, above our heads, I heard a phone ring. It wasn't Daniel's familiar ringtone, but Claire's, sharp and short. The sound echoed down into the basement through the stairwell gap, cold and clear, so sharp it felt like someone had knocked directly against my temple. Yes, doctor, Claire's voice came through, smooth and terrifyingly calm. I think their condition has worsened. I froze. Howard stopped. He didn't turn around, but I saw his shoulders tense slightly. A tiny, lightning-fast reaction, as if he had been waiting for this exact moment. I know, Claire continued, lowering her voice, though every word still reached my ears. The delusions are more obvious now. They believe we're conspiring against them. Yes, especially her. Me. I clapped a hand over my mouth instinctively, as if afraid that even breathing too loudly would be taken as proof of so-called delusions. My heart began to race, pounding so hard I felt dizzy. Yes, Dr. Raymond Cole, Claire went on, sounding as though she were reading from a report. We followed all the instructions. No, they're not cooperative. The husband is still very stubborn. Yes, I think a direct evaluation is necessary. There was a brief silence. I imagined a man on the other end nodding, taking notes, confirming a script that had already been written. We brought them down to the basement so they could calm down, Claire said, and this time she didn't even lower her voice. Just temporary isolation. Isolation. The word echoed in my head, heavy and cold. Not a bedroom. Not the living room, the basement. I turned to look at the stairs. The wooden door above was still firmly shut. I didn't hear Daniel anymore. Only Claire's voice, and my son's silence was more frightening than anything she could have said. The doctor will arrive within 45 minutes, Claire concluded. Thank you, doctor. The call ended with a dry, hollow beep. In that moment, I had no doubts left. This wasn't a family argument that had gotten out of hand. This was a procedure, a process, and we, Howard and I, were simply its subjects. I stepped backward until my back hit an old wooden shelf. My knees weakened. I had to grab the shelf to keep from collapsing. They're going to declare us incompetent, I whispered, my voice trembling so badly it startled even me. Howard, they're really going to do it. He turned to look at me. His eyes weren't panicked. On the contrary, they were so calm it scared me. I know, he said. Just 2 words, but they struck my chest like a blow. You know? I shook my head. Since when? Howard, they just called a doctor. They're building a story, and that doctor is coming to confirm it. Since Claire started asking me about my memory. he replied evenly, since Daniel asked if I still remembered my bank card PIN, since they started talking more about responsibility and safety than about family. I closed my eyes. Fragmented memories snapped together into a picture that was painfully clear. Questions that had seemed harmless. Concern that sounded like care, but was really inspection. Daniel? I whispered my son's name, as if saying it might somehow turn everything back to the way it was. How could you let this happen? I looked up at the stairs, as if I could see through the wooden door and into his face. In my mind, I saw Daniel as a little boy, brown-haired, scraped knees, running toward me after every fall from his bicycle. The child who once sobbed uncontrollably just at the thought that his parents might be angry with him. Now that same child was standing upstairs, silently letting his wife call a doctor to declare his mother delusional. Daniel couldn't avoid this, Howard said softly, as if reading my thoughts. He's already made his choice. I spun around. No, he's just being manipulated by Claire. You know Daniel. He's not that cruel. Howard didn't argue. He only looked at me, his eyes filled with both compassion and resolve. Have you noticed, he said, that he hasn't looked you in the eye once since this morning? The words stopped me cold. I replayed it in my mind, in the kitchen, when I asked about the money, when I asked about the paperwork. Daniel had always looked down at the table or over at Claire. Not once had he met my eyes. My heart twisted. Above us, I heard footsteps. Then Daniel's voice came down the stairs, for the first time since the door had been locked. "Mom!" he called, his voice no longer shaking, but no longer warm either. "Just stay calm. This is for your own good." I rushed toward the stairs and grabbed the wooden railing. "What are you doing, Daniel?" I screamed. "Do you realize that locking your parents up like this is illegal?" There was no immediate answer. I heard Claire whisper something to him, too quietly for me to hear, but long enough for me to understand that my opinion no longer mattered. "The doctor is just coming to evaluate," Daniel said afterward. "If everything's fine, you'll be allowed back to your room." Back to your room. Not opening the door, not apologizing, not letting us out, but allowed back to your room. A wave of panic surged through me, fast and violent. My heart pounded so hard I had to press a hand to my chest. The air in the basement felt thick, hard to breathe. "Howard," I gasped, "I can't breathe." He stepped to me immediately, placing a hand on my back, rubbing it in slow, steady circles. "Look at me," he said, his voice low but firm. "Breathe in. Now breathe out. Slowly." I did as he said, though tears were already spilling over. In my mind, the worst possibilities lined up one after another. I had heard too many stories. With just one word, incompetent, I could lose the right to make decisions about my property, my home, even my own medical care. They could take me anywhere, keep me there, and call it care. "Howard," I whispered, tears running down my chin. "If that doctor signs the papers, what do we do?" He looked straight into my eyes. "That's why I've been staying calm." The words sent a chill through me. Not fear, realization. The man standing in front of me was no longer the gentle, older husband I had known in daily life. "They think this basement is isolation," he continued, his voice low and clear. "But to me, it's something else." "What?" I asked, barely breathing. Howard turned his head, scanning the basement. Every corner, every shadow, every old brick. He didn't answer right away. "Margaret," he said finally, "do you trust me?" I didn't hesitate. "Yes." "Then listen to me," he said. "No matter what you hear upstairs, no matter what they say, don't react on instinct. Don't argue. Don't try to prove you're lucid. Let them believe they're in control." I swallowed hard. "Why?" He stepped toward the brick wall again, His hand rested once more on that darker brick, this time firmly. "Because," he said, "in this kind of game, the person who thinks they've already won is usually the one who loses the fastest." Above us, I heard a car pull up outside, doors closing, new footsteps, heavier, slower. The doctor had arrived. My heart was pounding so hard I was sure the entire basement could hear it. I looked at Howard, then at the old brick wall, and for the first time since the basement door had slammed shut behind me, I understood that my greatest fear was no longer being declared incompetent. It was about to learn the truth my husband had been hiding for nearly half a lifetime. The footsteps above grew closer, but Howard didn't turn around. He stood close to the old brick wall, his hand placed exactly on that darker brick I had seen for decades without ever noticing. Under the basement's weak yellow light, it looked no different from the others, old, rough, anonymous. If not for this moment, I would never have believed that something so ordinary could change an entire life. Howard took a deep breath. I watched his chest rise and fall, slow and controlled. He pressed his thumb lightly against the brick. At first, nothing happened. My heart pounded. I even thought I had imagined it, that this was just a hopeless attempt to calm me in the middle of panic. Then suddenly, a very small click sounded. Not loud, not dramatic, but in the enclosed space of the basement, it was so clear that goosebumps rose on my skin. Howard pushed the brick inward, not forcefully, not prying, but with a familiar motion, as if he had done this many times before. A thin seam appeared between the surrounding bricks. Then an entire section of the wall shifted slightly to the side, revealing a narrow black gap. My mouth fell open, but no words came out. Howard slid his hand into the opening and pulled gently. The whole section of wall moved aside like a hidden door. Behind it was not concrete or dirt, as I had always assumed, but a completely different space. Darker, deeper, and terrifyingly organized. "My God," I whispered, my voice breaking. Howard reached inside and flipped a small switch. White light flooded on. Not the old basement bulb, but sharp modern lighting, the kind I'd only ever seen in offices or professional workspaces. I stood frozen. Inside was a sealed room, not large but obsessively neat. Metal shelves lined both walls, stacked with carefully labeled file boxes. A work desk sat in the center, holding a fairly new desktop computer, a small printer, and a thick bundle of documents tied neatly together. In the corner, a dark gray safe rested against the wall, heavy and solid. I stepped forward once, then stopped, as if afraid that one more movement might make everything collapse. "Howard," I turned to him, my throat dry. "What is this?" He closed the hidden door behind us. When the wall slid back into place, the outer basement seemed to disappear entirely, leaving us in a separate space, so quiet I could hear my own heartbeat. "I meant to tell you," he said, his voice low and steady. "But not now. Not like this." I let out a shaky, breathless laugh. "Are you kidding me? Howard, I've lived in this house for 30 years. I've cleaned every corner, every stair. I thought I knew every brick in it." He looked at me, a flicker of regret crossing his eyes. "I know." I slowly turned in a circle, my hand brushing over the file shelves, touching labels with years, locations, names. They weren't family papers, not bills or renovation contracts. They looked like evidence. "How long have you been doing this?" I asked. "Almost 24 years, he replied. 24 years. The number hit me like a slap. 24 years. Nearly as long as we'd owned this house. All that time, I said slowly, I knew nothing. Howard sat down in the chair by the desk. Suddenly, he looked visibly older. His shoulders sagged, his back curved slightly, as if the weight he'd carried for so long had finally been set down. "I wanted you to be safe," he said. "I wanted you to live a normal life." I swallowed. "And you?" He didn't answer right away. Instead, he opened a drawer, pulled out a thick folder, and placed it on the desk. On its cover was a year that made my blood run cold, 2001. "I didn't retire," Howard said, no longer evasive. "I disappeared." I looked at him, then at the folder. A memory surfaced. The day he came home earlier than usual, more than 20 years ago. I remembered asking him about it and him saying the company was restructuring, that he'd decided to step away. "I was the lead supervising engineer," he continued, "for a major project in the northern suburbs of the city, a 12-story commercial building. I heard the name of that city, heard that location, and a cold sensation ran straight down my spine. I had seen it on the news before, a long time ago. It collapsed one morning," Howard said, his voice steady, "during rush hour. 52 people died." I raised a hand to cover my mouth. Old, blurry images in my memory suddenly became brutally sharp. Piles of concrete, ambulances, blankets covering motionless bodies. "You? You were involved?" I asked, my voice barely sounding like my own. "I warned them," he said, 3 times. "I wrote reports. I demanded construction be halted because the materials didn't meet standards." He opened the folder, flipped through a few pages quickly, then turned it toward me. I saw copies of emails, technical notes, Howard's signature at the bottom of the pages. "They ignored it," he went on, "because replacing the materials would have cost an extra $2 million. And when the building collapsed..." He stopped and took a deep breath. "They needed someone to take responsibility." I understood before he finished. "You." Howard nodded. "They forged my signature, said I had approved everything. The media needed a name, the authorities needed a culprit, and I was the perfect choice." I staggered back a step, gripping the table to stay upright. I looked at the man in front of me, the husband who had slept beside me for 46 years, and realized I had never known this part of his life. "They threatened me," Howard said, his voice lowering. "Not just me, you, and Daniel, who was just a boy back then." My heart tightened. "Threatened how?" "Accidents," he said simply. "Things that look like accidents." A heavy silence settled over the hidden room. I could hear cars passing somewhere far away, as if from another world. "So you stayed silent," I whispered. Howard nodded. "I walked away from everything. I came home. I became an ordinary husband, an ordinary father, and I began documenting." He gestured around the room. "Everything here is what I couldn't say out loud. Evidence, names, money trails, other deaths." I was trembling. "You lived with this alone for 24 years. Not completely alone," he said. "I had you, but I couldn't pull you into it." I looked at the safe in the corner, the computer still glowing, then back at Howard. Tears had started spilling without me noticing. "You thought I was that fragile?" I asked, not accusing, just aching. Howard stood and stepped in front of me. He placed his hand against my cheek as gently as the first day we met. "No," he said. "I thought you were too strong." Above us, I heard the basement door open. Claire's voice rang down, cold and controlled. "The doctor is here. Are you ready?" Howard looked at me one last time, his eyes firmer than ever. "Margaret," he said, "from this moment on, nothing will be the same." I nodded, tears running down my cheeks, because I knew that the secret buried for 24 years had just been unearthed. Claire's voice still echoed in my ears, but inside the hidden room behind the false wall, time seemed to slow. Howard stood at the desk, one hand resting on the thick folder, while I sat down on the metal chair beside it, my mind spinning under the weight of the truth that had just crashed down on me. "How long have you been watching them?" I asked, my voice hoarse from crying. Howard didn't answer right away. He opened the left drawer and took out an old notebook, its cover worn, the edges of the pages yellowed. He placed it in front of me and said slowly, 23 years. I opened the first page. The dates were written carefully, Howard's handwriting painfully familiar. The first page held a single line, Black Ridge Development. Surveillance begins. Black Ridge Development. The name wasn't unfamiliar. I had seen it on billboards along the highway, on newly built office towers. In business articles Howard used to skim in the mornings. A large, successful corporation, praised as a symbol of modern urban development. "Their chairman is Victor Harlan," Howard said, as if mentioning an old acquaintance, "one of the most powerful men in this state." I looked up at him. "You know him?" Howard gave a thin smile. "Not socially, but I know him very well." He pulled a file box from the shelf and opened it. Inside were copies of contracts, expense statements, printed emails, everything organized by year, by project, by name. "After the collapse in 2001, Howard said, I started there, not for revenge, but to understand." "Understand what?" I asked. "Why a building could collapse like that," he replied, "and why the people truly responsible kept building, kept being celebrated." I skimmed a few pages. The numbers staring back at me were no longer familiar household expenses, but sums so large they made me dizzy. Howard pointed to a ledger. "This," he said, "bribes, disguised as consulting fees." He flipped to another page. "This is money laundering. Subsidiaries, shell companies, routed through 3 states, then back again." Each page he turned felt like another blade cutting deeper into my understanding of the world I thought I lived in. I had believed these things existed only in newspapers and on television. I never imagined they were hidden right beneath my feet, behind an old brick wall. "They signed contracts for cheaper materials," Howard continued, his voice even, like someone who had told this story too many times in his own head. "They falsified inspection reports, and if anyone noticed—" He stopped, his eyes darkening. Then that person went silent. "How?" I asked. Though I already suspected the answer, Howard pulled 3 photographs from another file and laid them on the desk in front of me. 3 men, 3 different faces, but they shared something in common. Serious, intelligent eyes. 3 engineers, he said. They worked for Black Ridge. They asked questions. I picked up one photo. Accidents, Howard said. One fell from scaffolding. One died in a gas line explosion at home. One was hit by a car while jogging. I shuddered. And no one questioned it? Some did, he replied. But suspicion isn't enough. Not when you're up against money, politics, and connections you can't see. I set the photos down, my hands shaking. You lived with all of this, and still came home, had dinner with me, took our son to school. Howard nodded slightly. I had to, so no one would suspect anything, so you and Daniel would be safe. And you? I asked. He smiled sadly. I wasn't on the priority list. I turned away, not wanting him to see my tears, but in that small room there was nowhere to hide. You keep everything here? I asked, forcing my voice to stay steady. Not just here, Howard said. This is only part of it. He turned on the computer. The screen lit up, showing an interface I had never seen on his home computer. Encrypted folders, files labeled with initials, dates, codes. Everything has backups, he explained, in multiple locations, multiple formats. I looked at him, feeling both proud and terrified. If something happens to you? Howard nodded as if he'd been waiting for that question. Then everything is released automatically. Released? I repeated. Sent to the press. Sent to investigators. Sent to people they can't silence all at once. My scalp went numb. You prepared for your own death. Howard shook his head. I prepared for the truth. A soft sound came from above, like a door closing. I held my breath. Howard glanced at his watch. They think they're controlling the situation, he said quietly, but locking us down here triggered the emergency protocol. What protocol? I asked. He turned to me, more serious than I had ever seen him. Emergency protocol. He typed quickly on the keyboard. A small window appeared on the screen, a countdown ticking away. This is a safeguard, he said. If I don't confirm my safety status within a certain time, the system starts sending the data. My heart pounded. Howard, you planned for this. From the day I realized they would eventually come for me, he replied, and possibly through my own family. I lowered my head, guilt flooding in. If I had known sooner. He placed his hand over mine. You couldn't have changed this, and I didn't want you living in fear all those years. I took a deep breath. So what now? Howard looked at the screen, then at me. Now I take the next step. He opened another drawer and pulled out a phone I had never seen before. Small, black, no logo. This phone isn't tied to any personal account, he said. It can't be traced the usual way. I realized I was shaking. Who are you calling? Howard looked at me for a long moment as if making sure I was ready to hear the answer. The FBI, he said. I opened my mouth, but no sound came out. In my mind, the peaceful life I thought I had shattered into pieces. You've been working with them all this time? I finally managed. Not officially, Howard replied. Not until now. He glanced back at the countdown on the screen, the numbers slowly decreasing. But now, he said, it's time. Above us, I heard shoes pacing, Daniel and Claire's voices drifting down, indistinct. They had no idea that, right beneath their feet, a chain of events had been set in motion. One Howard had prepared for 23 years. Howard raised the phone to his ear. Before dialing, he looked at me. Margaret, he said, his voice low and firm. From this moment on, there's no turning back. I nodded, my heart racing. We lost the chance to turn back the moment they locked the basement door, I replied. Howard gave a faint smile, then dialed. And in that instant, I knew that everything we had once called peace had only been the silence before the storm. Howard set the phone down on the desk. The computer screen in front of us was still glowing. I expected him to say something to reassure me, or at least explain the next step. Instead, he quietly opened another folder. A name appeared on the screen that made my heart tighten. Daniel L. I jumped to my feet, the metal chair scraping loudly against the concrete floor. Howard, what are you doing? I asked, though part of me already knew. He turned to me, his eyes filled with exhaustion and resolve. Margaret, I tried to avoid this for as long as I could, but you need to know. He clicked the mouse. A flood of documents appeared. Bank statements, emails, security camera stills, all bearing my son's name. My throat went dry. No, Daniel wouldn't. Howard raised a hand, signaling me to sit. Look. I looked, and line by line, number by number, it felt like hammer blows crashing into my chest. $372,000. The figure was highlighted in red on a summary sheet. Gambling debt accumulated in less than 2 years. Casinos in Atlantic City, Howard said slowly, and several underground gambling rooms. I shook my head, feeling like I was reading the file of a stranger. Daniel doesn't gamble. He's always hated that stuff. Howard didn't argue. He simply turned to another page. Photos of Daniel leaving a casino, a baseball cap pulled low. Another image showed him sitting in a VIP room, stacks of multicolored chips in front of him. I closed my eyes and took a deep breath. "Why do you have all of this?" "Because I had to know," Howard said, "and because someone wanted me to know." He opened another email. The sender was an unfamiliar address. The recipient, Daniel. "We need someone inside the family, someone with access to the assets. You're a good fit." I let out a hollow laugh. "Family? Is that what they're calling us?" Howard didn't laugh. "They're talking about you and me." I looked at him, then back at the screen. "What about Claire?" I asked, my voice shaking. Howard typed a few keys. Another folder opened, labeled Claire B. "Claire has worked at a bank since she was very young," he said. "At first, just an administrative position. But then transfer records appeared. Small transactions, scattered, hard to detect. But when assembled, they formed a clear money trail. Funds moving in, funds moving out, routed through multiple accounts and shell companies. She helped move the money," Howard said. "Not directly, but enough to stay under the radar. Daniel owed money. Blackridge offered a solution." My stomach twisted. "What solution?" "Money laundering," he replied, "and in return, they wiped out his debt." I stood up and took a few steps around the cramped room, clutching my chest. "No, Daniel couldn't." "Daniel did," Howard said, without anger, without judgment, just the bare truth. "He signed the papers, took the money, and followed instructions." I turned back to him. "Then what about Silver Haven?" Howard opened another folder. This time it contained images of a beautiful, bright building. Green grounds, a small pond, a silver-plated sign, Silver Haven Senior Living. "A luxury care facility," I murmured. "Claire said it was the best." Howard nodded. "On paper." He pulled out a chart, timelines marked in red. "People who go in here," he said, "live an average of no more than 11 months. My eyes widened. "What?" "Heart failure," he continued. "Strokes, kidney failure, natural causes." I trembled. "But they're elderly. That happens." Howard shook his head. "Not at this rate." He opened another statistical table. Cold, emotionless numbers. A comparison between Silver Haven and other facilities in the same region. 3 times higher, he said. And all of these people had one thing in common. "What?" I whispered. "Significant assets," Howard replied. "Homes, retirement funds, real estate." My head felt like it was about to explode. "You're saying?" "Silver Haven is a legal place to end the lives of wealthy seniors," he said, "with paperwork, with signatures, with decisions made in their best interest." I collapsed back into the chair, no longer able to stand. "And Daniel..." Howard looked at me, sadness deeper than ever in his eyes. "Daniel needed money, and they needed control of our assets." "So that's why they said we were incompetent," I whispered, the pieces finally fitting together. "That's why they wanted legal power of attorney," Howard nodded. "Once we enter Silver Haven, the assets transfer legally. No disputes, no investigations." I broke down, tears pouring uncontrollably. "He's my son." Howard came to me and placed a hand on my shoulder. "I know." I looked up at him. "When did you know?" "A year ago," he answered, when Daniel started asking questions he'd never asked before. I remembered. Recent dinners, Daniel asking about the will, about insurance, about the value of the lake house. I had laughed, thinking it was just the idle concern of an adult child. "I meant to tell you," Howard continued, "but I hoped Daniel would stop." I wiped my tears, my voice breaking. "But he didn't." Howard shook his head. "No." And as the gambling debt grew, as Blackridge tightened the pressure, he chose the easiest path. I clenched my hands. killing us. With paperwork. Howard said nothing. The silence answered for him. Above us, footsteps sounded. I heard Daniel's voice drifting down, indistinct but enough to make my heart ache. "Margaret," Howard said softly, "I need you to understand one thing." I turned to him. "We're not just protecting ourselves," he said. "We're standing against a system that has killed a lot of people, legally." I took a deep breath, forcing my voice to hold. "And our son is part of that system." Howard nodded slowly. I closed my eyes for a moment. When I opened them, I knew I was no longer the woman I had been a few hours earlier. My last innocence had been stripped away, not by a distant enemy, but by my own blood. "If this is a war," I said, my voice low but steady, "then I want to know where I stand." Howard looked at me, and for the first time in that room, he smiled. Not a smile of relief, but the smile of a man who was finally no longer fighting alone. "You stand with me," he said, and in that moment, between concrete walls and buried secrets, I understood that the most painful thing wasn't betrayal itself, but realizing you must face that truth in order to survive. Howard didn't hesitate another second. He pulled a small black phone from the bottom drawer of the desk, its surface matte, no logo, no touchscreen, like any phone I had ever known. It looked like a device from another world, a world I had just been dragged into without time to adjust. "Satellite phone," Howard said, as if reading my thoughts. "It doesn't rely on local towers. It can't be cut off." I watched him dial a short sequence of numbers, fast, decisive. My heart was pounding so loudly I feared the people upstairs might hear it. The call connected almost immediately. "Lewis?" A woman's voice answered, calm and firm. "Confirm identity." Howard responded with a string of characters I didn't understand. The woman fell silent for 2 seconds, then her tone changed. No longer verification, but confirmation. "Confirmed. Are you safe?" Howard glanced at me. "Not yet," he said, "but we're alive." I heard the sound of typing on the other end. Then her voice came back clearer, more serious. "Our team is en route. Estimated time to reach you, 45 minutes. 45 minutes. Under normal circumstances, that would be just the time it takes for a cup of coffee to go cold. Right now, it felt as long as an entire lifetime. "Silver Haven," Howard continued, "and Dr. Raymond Cole." "We know," the woman replied. "Both have been under surveillance for over 2 years." I held my breath. Howard didn't look surprised, but for me, it was another blow to my understanding. "Daniel and Claire," Howard said slowly. "They locked us in the basement." There was a very brief pause. Then her voice turned icy. "In that case," she said, "they are approaching the threshold of committing federal kidnapping." I closed my eyes. My son. The word kidnapping sounded too distant, too brutal to be attached to the name Daniel, the boy who once sobbed when he broke his arm at 8, who used to call me every night his first week of college because he couldn't sleep. "We need you to remain where you are," the woman continued. "Do not confront them. Do not reveal yourselves." Howard nodded instinctively, even though she couldn't see him. "Understood." The call ended. Howard set the phone down, his hand still steady. I had to grip the edge of the desk to keep from collapsing. "You said federal witness protection?" I asked, my voice so low I could barely hear it myself. Howard exhaled slowly, as if finally allowing himself to relax just a little. 5 years, he said. 5 official years. I turned to him, unable to hide my shock. 5 years, and I never knew. "Because you weren't allowed to," he replied, "and because I didn't want you to." I gave a soft, humorless laugh. You protected the whole world, but thought I couldn't handle the truth. Howard looked at me, his gaze gentle. I thought that if you didn't know, you could live like a normal person a little longer. I was about to respond when a noise above startled me. A door slammed open, rushed footsteps. No more stealth. "Howard," I whispered, "something's wrong." Howard moved quickly to the computer and activated the camera system. The screen split into multiple small windows, each showing a corner of the house I thought I knew down to every creak. The living room, the front door wide open. Daniel stood there. But he wasn't alone. Beside my son were two unfamiliar men. Both wore dark jackets, solid builds, eyes so cold I shivered just looking at them on the screen. "Where's Claire?" I asked, my heart racing. Howard zoomed in on another camera. The back exit. Claire's car was gone. "She left," Howard said, his voice darkening. "She ran." My lungs felt like they'd been emptied. "She left Daniel behind?" "No," Howard replied. "She played her role, sent others." I looked back at the screen. Daniel was speaking to the two men. His face was tense, but not panicked, not the look of someone being forced. "Our son," I whispered. "Does he know who they are?" Howard was silent for a few seconds. Then he said, "Yes." One of the men walked to the basement door. I saw his hand rest on the handle, testing it lightly. The door didn't open. He turned to Daniel and said something. Daniel nodded. My heart slammed painfully against my ribs. "Howard, what are they going to do?" Howard didn't answer right away. He stared at the screen, like someone rereading a script he had predicted but still hoped wouldn't come true. "They want what's down here," he said finally. "The evidence, and if necessary, to eliminate the witnesses." I clenched my hands. "So our son is leading them," Howard said without flinching. A knock echoed from the basement door. Not polite, not asking. A knock meant to announce. "Dad, Mom." Daniel's voice came down through the thick concrete. "Open the door. This has gone too far." I stepped forward instinctively, the reflex of a mother, but Howard stopped me. "Margaret," he said softly. "Don't. I have to talk to him," I whispered. "He's still my son." Howard looked at me for a long moment, then he nodded. "1 minute. Just one." I moved closer to the door, my heart threatening to leap from my chest. "Daniel!" I called, forcing my voice to stay steady. "What are you doing?" There was a pause. Then Daniel answered, his voice deeper, harder. "You wouldn't understand, Mom. Everything is more complicated than you think. It can all stop," I said, tears spilling. "You just need to leave this house. Right now." I heard my son sigh. "I can't." "Because of the money?" I asked. "Or because of them?" Daniel didn't answer right away. When he finally spoke, his voice was hoarse. "Because I've gone too far, Mom." I closed my eyes. In that moment, I understood that the person standing upstairs was no longer the little boy I once held in my arms. He was a man who had made a choice, and that choice was pushing all of us toward the edge. Howard pulled me away from the door. On the screen, one of the two men had begun scanning the walls, his gaze probing. "We don't have much time," Howard said, his voice terrifyingly calm. "They know there's something here." I looked at him, then back at the screen, where my son was standing among strangers inside the very house I had once believed was the safest place in the world. The danger was no longer a possibility. It had crossed the threshold. Howard didn't say another word. He simply took my hand and led me away from the desk area, deeper into the back of the hidden room. There, under the dim yellow light, I saw a low steel door almost blending into the concrete wall. "When did you do all this?" I whispered, my voice hoarse. "One night at a time," Howard answered shortly. "Over 2 years. He unlocked it. The door made a very soft sound and opened, revealing a narrow passage sloping downward, barely wide enough for one person to crawl through. Inside was pitch dark, the air cold and damp, smelling of earth mixed with metal. "A tunnel," I said, not sure whether I was asking or stating a fact. "It leads to the Miller family's house," Howard said. 3 houses south. They moved away last year." I stood frozen. You even prepared an escape route?" Howard turned to look at me. His eyes weren't panicked, weren't dramatic. They held only the steadiness of a man who had prepared for this moment for a very long time. "Margaret," he said, "listen to me." He went back to the desk, opened a small compartment inside the safe, and took out a black hard drive, small enough to fit in the palm of my hand. "A complete copy," he said, placing it in my hand. "Everything." I gripped it, feeling as though I were holding our entire life, and perhaps the lives of many others. "No," I said immediately, shaking my head hard. "No way. If we go together." Howard looked at me for a long moment. "We can't." "What are you going to do?" I asked, my heart racing. He turned to a control panel mounted on the wall. On it was a red button covered by a clear plastic guard. "Destroy the evidence," he said. "The originals." I stepped back. "What did you say?" "If they get into this room," Howard said slowly, "they can take or alter the data. The external copies won't matter if they can prove the source was compromised." "But you said there was an automatic system." "It still needs time," he cut me off, his voice turning firm for the first time. "And we don't have time." The sounds upstairs grew louder, no longer cautious footsteps, but heavy shoes moving straight down the basement stairs. I heard metal scraping against the wall, low, urgent voices. "Howard," I said, tears spilling over, "you can't stay." He stepped in front of me, placed both hands on my shoulders, and looked straight into my eyes. "Margaret, you have to go." "What about you?" I asked, my voice breaking. He smiled very faintly. "I'll stay here, and I'll make sure they don't get what they want." I shook my head, desperate. "Daniel is our son." Howard closed his eyes for a brief moment. When he opened them, his calm was almost unbearable. "And that's exactly why you have to go." The outer basement door burst open. Metal scraped hard against the steps. I spun around in shock. "No time," Howard said. He pushed the hard drive deeper into my hand. "Take this. Go. Now." I didn't know where I found the strength to keep talking. "If you stay, I know," he said, "but I also know what I'm doing." He pulled me into a tight embrace. The familiar scent of his clothes, the familiar rhythm of his heartbeat. Everything burned itself into my memory one last time. "Margaret," he whispered in my ear, "you live. That's what matters most." I had no strength left to argue. The footsteps were very close now. I heard Daniel's voice echoing down, tense and urgent. "I know you're down there, Dad," Daniel shouted. "Don't make this worse." Howard released me and gently pushed me toward the tunnel. "Go," he said. I bent down and crawled into the narrow passage. Cold earth scraped against my hands. I turned my head for one last look. Howard stood upright, his back to the tunnel, facing the room and whatever was about to come. "Howard," I called. He didn't turn around. He only raised his hand in a silent signal. I crawled into the darkness. The tunnel was so tight I had to breathe very slowly. My knees scraped against the dirt, burning with pain. Every movement made a soft rustling sound, and my heart pounded with fear of being discovered. Behind me, voices grew clearer. Strangers' voices, Daniel's voice. "There's something here," a man said. "My father hid it," Daniel replied, his voice tight. I'm sure of it. I bit my lip to keep from crying out. Every word from my son felt like a knife twisting into my back. I kept crawling through the thick darkness. The tunnel was longer than I'd expected. Time seemed to stretch endlessly. Then I heard another sound, far away, very faint, but unmistakable. Sirens. At first, just a single sound, very distant. I thought I was imagining it from the stress. But then it sounded again, and again, more of them, closer. Police sirens. My heart pounded so hard my ears rang. I crawled faster, my hands shaking, not daring to stop. Behind me, the noise suddenly turned chaotic. I heard shouting, running footsteps, metal slamming into walls. FBI sirens blared insistently, cutting through the earth like a signal from another world, the world I was crawling back toward. At the end of the tunnel, a dim light appeared. I crawled a few more steps and emerged through a roughly covered wooden panel into an empty garage. The sudden open space made me dizzy. I dropped to my knees, gasping for air, tears streaming down my face. Outside, the sirens were getting closer. I clutched the hard drive to my chest. In my mind, there was only one thought. Not about my own safety, but about the man who had stayed behind the wall, facing everything so that I could live. And for the first time in my life, I truly understood what a life and death choice was. A choice with no right or wrong, only a price to be paid. 3 months after that night, I walked into the federal courthouse with ice-cold hands, even though outside it was a beautiful morning with pale sunlight. The gray stone building, the tall steps, and the American flag waving gently in the wind made me feel as though I was entering a place not meant for women nearly 70 years old. But then I thought of Howard, of the look in his eyes that night, and I kept walking. The courtroom was large, the ceiling high, white lights shining down on long wooden benches. I sat in the witness section, my back straight, but my heart pounding so hard I had to place my hands on my thighs to keep them from shaking. In front of me were the judge, the jury, the attorneys with thick folders. Across the room at the defendant's table, I saw Daniel. My son looked thinner. His shoulders were slumped, his eyes avoiding mine. None of the confidence he used to have. In that brief moment, old memories flooded back. His first day of school, his graduation day, the day he brought Claire home, holding my hand and smiling so brightly. I took a deep breath to keep from being pulled under by the past. When I stood to take the oath, my voice filled the terrifyingly quiet room. I heard my own voice, clear and slow, as if someone else were speaking through me. The prosecutor began with basic questions: my name, my age, my relationship to the defendants. Then he looked at me, his expression serious but not cold. "Mrs. Lewis," he said, "please tell the court what happened the night you and your husband were locked in the basement." I closed my eyes for a brief second. When I opened them, I no longer saw the courtroom. I saw the basement door slam shut. I heard the dry click of the lock. I heard Claire's cold voice from above. And I heard Howard whispering in my ear. I told them everything, without embellishment, without avoiding anything. I told them about the morning Daniel and Claire came over with smiles that were far too rehearsed. About Silver Haven, a name that sounded like a dream retirement, but was actually a doorway to death. I spoke about the paperwork, the legal phrases used like scalpels, slowly cutting away our right to decide for ourselves while still appearing lawful. In the courtroom, I saw people lowering their heads to take notes. I saw an older woman in the gallery raise a hand to her mouth, tears silently falling. When I described the hidden room behind the false wall, the years Howard had spent secretly collecting evidence, the entire room seemed to hold its breath. I didn't hide the fact that I had known nothing. I didn't pretend to be stronger than I was. I said plainly that I had trusted my son, trusted the ordinary life I thought I had. Then came Silver Haven. The prosecutor displayed documents the FBI had collected. Charts, statistics, cold numbers filled the large screen behind me. Mortality rates, the average time from admission to death, asset transfers that took place shortly before. "Did you know," he asked me, "that Silver Haven has had more than 300 suspicious deaths over the past 5 years? I shook my head, my throat tightening. I only found out when it was already too late. A man stood up from the gallery. His hands were shaking, his voice breaking as he asked to speak. The judge allowed it. He introduced himself as the son of a woman who had lived at Silver Haven. "They told me my mother died of heart failure," he said, tears streaming down his face. "But she was healthy when she went in. Just 6 months later, she was gone." The air in the courtroom grew heavy. I realized I wasn't just telling my own story. I was standing among countless others, other lives, other pain buried beneath officially stamped documents. When it was Daniel's turn to be questioned, I didn't look at him. I was afraid that if I did, I wouldn't be strong enough to continue. His attorney spoke of financial pressure, of debts, of manipulation by Claire and Blackridge's people. I heard every word, each one like a small but deep cut. "Did you know," the prosecutor asked Daniel, "that locking your parents in the basement and attempting to declare them legally incompetent could have led to their deaths?" Daniel was silent for a long time. Then he nodded. Just one small nod, but enough to send murmurs through the courtroom. "Then why did you still do it?" came the next question. Daniel lifted his head. For the first time during the entire trial, he looked at me. His eyes were red, exhausted, with nothing left to hide. "Because I thought I had no other choice," he said. I closed my eyes, not because I couldn't bear the truth, but because I realized it had existed for a long time. I just hadn't wanted to face it. Claire was different. She cooperated. She provided names, addresses, methods of transferring money. She spoke smoothly, clearly, like someone who had prepared for this moment long ago. In exchange, her sentence was reduced. I wasn't surprised. Claire always knew how to survive. On the day of sentencing, I sat quietly in the front row. Daniel received a sentence the attorneys called severe but appropriate. I heard the numbers, the legal terms, but they all blurred together. In my mind, there was only the image of a child who once held my hand to cross the street, now standing before the judge. When the trial ended, I walked outside alone. The late afternoon sun warmed the courthouse plaza in a strange, gentle way. I stood there for a long time, breathing, feeling my heartbeat slowly return to normal. I had once believed that being a mother meant carrying every mistake of your child on your own shoulders, that if a child went astray, it must be because you hadn't done enough. But standing in that courtroom, hearing hundreds of stories, both similar and different, I understood something. A mother's love doesn't make her child good or bad. It only gives them a place to begin. The rest, Isha, is their own choice. I was in pain. There's no other word for it. But I no longer blamed myself. I stood up, I told the truth, and I did what so many people are afraid to do. I looked betrayal straight in the eye, called it by its name, and did not turn away. When I left the courthouse, I knew my life had entered a different chapter. Not a chapter of fear or silence, but a chapter of awakening. And even though the price I had to pay was the pain of being a mother, I accepted it, not as a punishment, but as a truth that had to be faced, so that I could continue living the rest of my life fully and without bowing my head. I thought that when I walked out of that courtroom, everything had finally come to a close, that the truth had been exposed, the villains had been named, and the rest of my life, though scarred, could finally be peaceful. I was wrong. 3 days after the sentencing, as I was sitting alone in the temporary apartment provided by the federal authorities, looking out the window at the last autumn leaves quietly falling onto the sidewalk, the doorbell rang. It wasn't the familiar sound of a neighbor stopping by. It was short, firm, intentional. I knew it wasn't friends coming to check on me, and deep down, I knew that this story was not over yet. 2 FBI agents stood outside the door. They didn't need to introduce themselves. I had grown too familiar with the badges on their jackets, with those eyes that were both polite and alert. "Mrs. Lewis," the woman said, her voice low and measured, "we need to talk to you. Again." I invited them in. The small room suddenly felt tighter, as if the air itself understood that what was about to be said would not be light. The man opened a black briefcase and placed on the table a folder thinner than the ones I had seen before, yet heavy enough to weigh on my heart at first glance. "Victor Harlan," he said, "not the mastermind." I didn't react right away. I just stared at the name that had been repeated throughout the investigation, the name the media had called the brain behind Black Ridge Development. He was only a link, the woman continued, someone in the middle, powerful enough to operate, but not powerful enough to control the entire system. I sat up straighter. Then who was controlling it? They exchanged a very brief look. Then the man said something that sent a chill down my spine. A federal judge. The room was so quiet I could hear the ticking of the wall clock. I had stood before a judge. I had believed that bench represented the final symbol of justice. And now, that justice had been twisted from within. "He didn't run things directly," the agent continued. "He controlled them with signatures, with rulings, with decisions about which cases moved forward and which ones were shut down." I swallowed hard. "Silverhaven?" "Just one link," the woman confirmed. "A model. There are at least 12 similar facilities in 3 other states." I closed my eyes. The numbers from the courtroom came back to me. Hundreds of deaths. Hundreds of families who had lost loved ones without ever being asked. "Howard," I said softly, almost by reflex. "My husband, did he know?" The man shook his head. "Not in the way you're thinking." He flipped to another page. "We believe Howard was used." I opened my eyes, my heart pounding. "Used how?" "By his integrity," the agent said. "By his desire to bring the truth to light." They explained it to me, piece by piece, each one falling into place with painful, brutal clarity. While Howard believed he was building a case to take down Blackridge and Victor Harlan, someone deeper in the shadows had been quietly steering that effort, removing Harlan, playing the hero, and keeping the real system running in the dark. "Your husband was an engineer," the woman said slowly. "He thought in logic. He believed that if the biggest link fell, everything else would collapse. But it didn't," I whispered. "No," the man replied. "Harlan was expendable." I sat there in silence. In my mind, I saw Howard in that hidden room, his eyes steady, believing he was doing the right thing, believing that once the truth came out, it would correct everything on its own. "So, what do you need me to do?" I asked, even though I had already sensed the answer. The woman placed both hands on the table and leaned toward me. "We need you to continue testifying." I let out a soft laugh, not because it was funny. "I already testified." "Not enough," she said. "What you know, what you've lived through. It can open other doors." I shook my head. "I'm not an investigator. I'm just a woman who lost her husband, lost her son, and nearly lost her life." The man looked at me, his gaze not coercive. "That's exactly why your voice carries weight." I stood and walked to the window. Outside, the city kept moving as if nothing had happened. People going to work, shopping, laughing. No one knew that beneath that orderly surface was a network that had taken so many lives. I don't know if I have the strength, I said, my voice tired. Every time I tell it, I relive everything. We understand, the woman said softly, and we won't force you. I turned back to them. But if I don't, then those people, she said, may never be named. In my mind, I saw the man who had stood up in the courtroom, the son who lost his mother at Silver Haven, the older women who had covered their mouths and cried as they listened to me speak. I thought of myself just a few months earlier, naive, believing that family and the law were enough to protect me. You're saying the truth goes deeper, I said, and that I've only seen the surface. The man nodded. That's right. I closed my eyes. In that brief darkness, I heard Howard's voice, not from a specific memory, but from the essence of who he was, his steadiness, his belief that silence was never the answer. When I opened my eyes, I knew I couldn't turn away. I need time, I said. Of course, the woman replied, but you should know. We don't have much. After they left, the room grew quiet again. I sat down, feeling the weight of everything I had just heard pressing on my chest. Victor Harlan was not the mastermind. Silver Haven was just one link. Howard, the man I loved for nearly half my life, had been used as a tool to clear the way for someone else. The truth was not only painful, it was more complex than anything I had ever imagined. I looked at my hands. The hands that had trembled while signing papers, that had clutched the hard drive in the dark tunnel, that had rested on the witness stand in court. I was no longer the woman I used to be. That evening, I took out a stack of blank paper. I began writing down names, faces, stories I had heard in the courtroom. Each line was a reminder that if I stopped, everything could sink back into silence. I was still afraid. I was still hesitant. But the memory of the victims, those who never had a chance to stand up, pushed me forward, and for the first time since everything began, I understood that I was not just a witness to a conspiracy. I had become part of the truth, a truth still waiting to be pulled into the light. It took me nearly a week to make my decision, not because I didn't understand the importance of speaking out, but because I understood the cost all too well. I had seen what happened to those who asked questions. I had lived with a man who carried the truth in silence for more than 2 decades, and I knew that once you stepped into the light, there was no way back. Then, one very early morning, while the city was still wrapped in a thin layer of fog, I made myself a cup of coffee and sat at the kitchen table. The first sunlight of the day fell across the old wooden surface where Howard and I had sat facing each other hundreds of times. I placed my hand on that table, closed my eyes, and in that moment, I no longer hesitated. I called the FBI agent back. I agree, I said. My voice was so calm that I surprised even myself. I'll go public with the story. Everything moved very quickly after that. So quickly that it felt as if I were being swept along by a current that had been waiting for a long time. Journalists began reaching out. Interviews were scheduled. The same questions repeated over and over, drilling into details I had tried to forget just to survive. The first time I sat in front of a camera, I trembled. Not because I was afraid of judgment, but because I knew I was opening the door to so many painful memories. Not only mine, but others as well. I'm not a hero, I said in that first interview. I'm just a woman who almost lost her right to live, and I don't want that to happen to anyone else. The program aired that evening. I didn't dare watch it. I turned off the television and sat in the quiet living room, listening to the clock tick. But the next morning, my phone began ringing non-stop. The first calls were from strangers. A woman with a trembling voice introduced herself as the daughter of someone who had lived at Silver Haven. An older man called to say his wife had died just 8 months after entering a nursing facility, and he had never understood why all the property paperwork had been handled so quickly. They told their stories. I listened. Some cried, some were angry. Some stayed silent for a long time on the other end of the line, as if for the first time in their lives, they no longer felt alone. The media response was stronger than I had imagined. Not just one article or one program, but a wave of independent investigations. Journalists digging into old rulings. Decisions that once seemed harmless were suddenly examined under a different light. The name Silver Haven appeared everywhere. Then other names followed. Premium care facilities with unusually high death rates, hastily signed rulings, files closed without questions, and then the name the FBI had mentioned, the federal judge, began appearing in the headlines. At first, just suspicions, then evidence, accounts and relatives' names, financial ties that could not be explained. The day he was arrested, I was sitting in a small waiting room at a newsroom, preparing for another interview. A young assistant walked in, eyes wide, her voice unable to hide her shock. "They just arrested him," she said, "right in his office." I didn't cheer. I didn't feel victorious. I simply sat down, placed my hand on my chest, and felt a lightness, as if part of an invisible burden had finally been lifted. The network began to collapse in ways I had never thought possible. Not in a single day, not with one decisive blow, but piece by piece, link by link, pulled into the light and forced to face the truth. New investigations were opened. Old rulings were reviewed. Hundreds of families received answers they had waited years for, even though those answers could never bring their loved ones back. During those months, there were times I was exhausted. Nights when I lay staring at the ceiling, wondering whether I had done the right thing, whether reopening all that pain truly brought any good. Whenever that happened, I thought of Howard, not in a sentimental way, but in a very practical one. I thought of his patience, the way he documented every detail, not out of hatred, but because he believed the truth had to be protected. I thought of how he had always stood behind me throughout our marriage, quietly, without show, but unshakably steady. And I understood that in some way he was still standing behind me now. I was no longer just a witness. I began to be invited to hearings on elder rights. I spoke to community groups. I met older people living alone, people who had signed documents without fully understanding the consequences. "I'm not here to tell you what to do," I often said. "I'm here to say that you have the right to ask questions, the right to refuse, the right to live out your life without being treated as an asset that needs to be handled." Gradually, I realized I had become something I never imagined, an advocate. Not because I was stronger than anyone else, but because I had gone through my greatest fear and learned what it looked like. I knew how silence could kill, and I knew that a voice, even a trembling one, could still create change. My family is no longer what it once was. That is the truth, and I won't soften it. There are no more noisy dinners, no more weekend calls from my son. There are empty spaces nothing can fill. But I have no regrets, because if I had stayed silent, I would have spent the rest of my life with a question that had no answer. Could I have done something differently? Now, every time I stand in front of a room full of people, every time I see an older woman nod as she listens to me speak, I know I made the right choice. Not the easy path, but the necessary one. And in the quietest moments, when I am alone, I feel it clearly. Howard never left. He is there in every decision I make, in every word I bring into the light. My family has changed. I have changed, but I do not turn back, because this time I choose not to be silent. When everything finally settled, I realized that life had not returned me to the starting point. It had placed me on a different path. Not loud, not glamorous, but steadier than I ever thought I could stand at 69. I began to travel. At first, just short flights, small talks at community centers, local libraries where people still gather to listen to one another's stories. Then, gradually, invitations came from different states. I stood before rooms full of gray hair and seasoned eyes, and I told my story, not to shock, but to illuminate. I spoke about the small signs we often overlook, questions about paperwork that come too early, offers made for your parents' own good that carry an unsettling urgency, gentle smiles hiding impatience. I didn't use harsh words. I didn't need to. The people in front of me understood all too well what it felt like to be dismissed simply because of age. Some evenings, after I finished speaking, an older woman would grip my hand tightly and whisper, "Thank you. I was about to sign papers last week." Sometimes men lingered long after the room had nearly emptied, just to ask one question. Where should I start? I didn't offer formulas. I had no miracles. I simply said, start by asking questions. Read carefully. Call someone outside the family for advice. And most important, trust your own instincts, even when they make you uncomfortable. There were times I was tired, times I wanted to return to a quiet room, close the door, and live the rest of my life in silence. But then I remembered the faces that had listened to me speak. I remembered the stories they carried, stories that had never been told. And I understood that if I stopped, it wouldn't be because I lacked strength. It would be because I was afraid to keep facing the truth. I am no longer a victim. That didn't come from a medal or a title. It came from the moment I stopped asking what I had done wrong and started asking, what can I do next? I am a survivor not because I escaped, but because I stayed with the truth long enough for it to lose its power to hurt me. I learned to love myself in a very different way, not through affirmations in the mirror or luxurious trips, but by allowing myself to rest when I needed to, by saying no without guilt, by understanding that my value is not in what I own or the roles I once played, but in the clarity I have managed to keep until today. Some nights I still think about my son. I remember his laughter as a child, the way he used to hold me tightly whenever he was afraid. I don't deny that longing. I don't push it away. But I also don't let it turn into excuse-making. Love does not mean denying the truth. Being a mother does not mean erasing yourself to preserve a beautiful image of your child at any cost. My life did not end with betrayal. It did not end with loss. Those things are real, and I do not minimize them. But they are not the final period. They are a comma, a necessary pause for me to look back, breathe, and move forward, not as who I was, but as someone who has awakened. Every morning, I stand in front of the mirror and look at the gray-haired woman there with a gentleness I never gave myself before. I don't wish to be younger. I don't need that. I only wish to be clear enough to live the rest of my life without bowing to fear. If there is one thing I want to leave behind, it is this. Age does not make us weak. Silence does. When we speak, even late, we not only protect ourselves, we open a path for others to follow. And if you are reading this, if this story touches you in any way, know that you are not alone. If you'd like, tell me where you are listening from, a small town or a familiar street somewhere. Leave a comment, share your thoughts, or simply say that you are still here. If this story helps you see something more clearly, please like it and subscribe so we can continue together through the stories ahead. I am grateful to you for listening, for staying to the very last lines, and for choosing not to turn away. At 69, I do not have a perfect ending. I have a different beginning, and this time, I walk forward with my eyes open, my heart steady, and the truth beside me.